Meeting. If we could please rise if we are able and pay attention to Councilwoman Ortiz for the invocation, to be followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we come to you, Lord, just with thanksgiving in our heart. Lord, we thank you for all that you've done. We thank you for what you're about to do with this great city. And Lord, we ask a special blessing around each family member that's represented here today at the table, each council member, their children, their grandchildren. Lord, we lift them up to you. We ask for a special prayer for the kids that are going to return back to school on tomorrow, Lord. We ask that you go with them. And we ask that you use them as vessels to talk to their peers about the COVID shot and help them to go through their day. Lord, we thank you for all that you've done. We can't thank you enough. And we ask forgiveness of our sins. And Lord, we ask that you lead and guide us as we go through this time of budget time and all the negotiations that we're making. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
Amen. Taylor, are we going to have the flag or are we going to move the camera towards it?
We don't have a camera.
We don't have a camera. We can move it a little.
There we go. Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, we move on to the roll call.
Okay, Mayor Daley Isla.
Yeah, here.
Council members Hillard.
Here.
Valdivia Acla.
Here.
Ortiz.
Here.
Emerson.
Here.
Padilla.
Here.
Nager.
Here.
Dobler.
Here.
Duncan.
Here.
And Lesser.
Here.
We have 10 present.
And being present, we have quorum at this point in time. We move on to the appointments, if the clerk would read.
A is an advisory council appointment of Robert Nugent to the City of Topeka Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA Advisory Council for a term ending August 10, 2023.
This is an appointment. These appointments typically are run by all of the council members for approval. The mayor does not vote on this item. Do we have questions, or what is the pleasure of the body?
Mayor, move approval.
We have approval by Councilman Emerson. We have a second by Councilman Dobler. Additional comments or questions on this approval? Seeing none, we proceed by voting.
Councilmember Lesser.
Yes.
Councilmembers Hillard.
Yes.
Valdivia Acla.
Yes.
Ortiz.
Yes.
Emerson.
Yes.
Padilla.
Yes.
Nager.
Yes.
Dobler.
Yes.
And Duncan.
Yes.
We have 9 yes, motion carries.
Is Mr. Nugent present we could recognize him?
No,
He's not, Mayor.
All right. We now move on to presentations. City Manager, the first one is the financial quarterly report. Is Steve going to do this one?
Yes, Steve will handle it. Director Wade.
Good evening, Madam Mayor. The second quarter report was released last week. In it, you'll find things are looking very strong through the second quarter, through June 30th. In the back of the book is a project update. I know there's been a few questions in regards to that. There's a couple of things of note with that. One is the notation that funding is to be determined. Those are things where bonds have not yet been let. The second part is I think there's been some questions in regards to some certain line items as to whether or not that adheres to current policy. What you have to do with those is remember that there is a parent and child relationship. The dot 0 is the parent. The dot 1, dot 2, dot 3, dot 4 become children. This is in the back of your book, or in the back of the second quarter report. And so you add all those up together to determine the proceeds. So if, for example, you had a desk that was being purchased, and let's say that desk was $8,000, and that was a .1, the total project might have been $100,000 overall. Does that make sense? I know that was one of the questions that was being asked on follow-up from that report.
Do we have any other questions for Mr. Wade with regards to that clarification? I can't see the chamber, so it seems like everybody is clear. You may proceed, Mr. Wade.
If there are no other questions in regards to the quarterly report, it's obviously a long one. Each fund is highlighted inside that quarterly report. Nothing of alarm that I would highlight at this point in time. Certainly, if Madam Mayor, if we roll into the forecast, some of that highlights back and forth. And if that works, we'll just go straight into the forecast. 2 items of note, City Manager, with the forecast. One is the expectation at the end of the year will be somewhere in the proximity of $5.7 million of extra surplus for the general fund. That's over and above what was budgeted. Please understand that's June 30 data and is subject to change. The second note, which was in the summary section of that memo, is the notation that we had expected the biogas project to be online for the full year. Obviously, with that not being online yet, we're not seeing that revenue. We expect that to be about $1.5 million of shortage for the year. Everything else, as you noted going through that memo, there's really nothing of significance. Any questions on the quarterly report or the forecast?
Questions for Mr. Wade?
Christina has her hand up.
Yes, Councilwoman Valdivia Alcara.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wondered, Steve, can we go real quick over page 51? I think this is in reference to what we had our meeting about several weeks ago. I don't see Lizone here, but Lizone and I were in a meeting with you all about diversity and the additional strides that the city is going to try to make with getting more outreach to increase the numbers on how much is being contracted out. And I do not profess to be proficient in all these numbers, but I think that the bottom line is what came out of that meeting was that we needed to be doing a better job. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. Leah Bowling has done a significant amount of work on this project and is currently working with the Greater Topeka Partnership. We have a survey in the field trying to expand our number of vendors. We also have quarterly lunch and learns scheduled with GTP to where we can actually highlight some of the opportunities that the city offers for these businesses.
Okay. And I think also that we talked about the importance of outreach, and I know that that's not, I mean, I don't know how much city staff does with that or how much of that is in the total venue of GTPE. I'm still learning, but I think that, you know, if we have overall seen that for almost the past 30 years, Lizone has been probably one of the only and consistently vocal people in the community that has given a proper sense of outrage and at times indignation into us needing to do a better job, and sometimes getting the feeling like that has not been happening. And I think that there was also a verification that was made in that meeting that the city has not been doing the record keeping that it needs to be doing for the reports, which is why they're working on this new database, which I hope proves to be more beneficial, because we know that we are in a time where Black and brown unemployment is higher in Topeka. the rates of their expenses for housing are higher. They're more housing burden, cost burden. And so I just want to bring this up in addition to what we've been discussing behind, at our meetings that we have, because I think it's important for the community to know that this is being worked on and that we need to do a better job on it all the way around.
We take that responsibility very seriously.
Thanks, Steve.
Yes, ma'am.
And just for the sake of additional information, I do want to add, Leah Bowling, prior to the retirement of our last finance person that was doing procurement, participated in some training that the city of Topeka supported so that she could understand the ins and outs of supplier diversity, so that we can start transitioning into this. This is a conversation the city manager had. I think it was city manager hasn't been a year or 2 years actually, because this
2
was
years.
before COVID.
2 years.
So it's a slow trickle, but it's one that we've been working on consistently. And of course, with COVID, we had some delays, but a lot of congratulations to Leah. Ever since she took over the department and now working with Steve, this has been a priority. So just want to make sure that the body knows that this has been something that the city has been working on now for 2 years.
Madam Mayor, might just throw in real quick, Leah just sent me a text. November 1st is the first lunch and learn this scheduled with GTP.
I think
Wonderful.
Oh, sorry. Can I just say one more thing, Mayor?
Absolutely.
Okay, I think that that's really good. Those lunch and learns are going to be beneficial, and we had talked about also specializing them. Lizone had given ideas for having specialty luncheons that meet the needs of the folks that you want to attend, and don't put all business owner minority businesses in one luncheon, because there's different types of businesses out there, and we know it takes a lot for these small businesses to do a lunch, to get out and actually have a lunch and take the time out. And I would also say, I want to just give a big shout out to Glenda Washington, because she does a fantastic job. So anybody that would say otherwise is not telling the truth. I definitely think what needs to happen is we need to give Glenda more staff to do that outreach in our minority business community.
Glenda stepped up when we reached out and has helped lead that charge, so we're very appreciative of her.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Additional comments or questions for Mr. Wade?
Councilwoman Hiller has.
Councilwoman Hiller.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to start with a thank you, because there was a lot of discussion earlier in the year about what was in these reports and the delinquency of the account management, or what appeared to be anyway. And there was also discussion about not even continuing to have these reports in the quarterly reports. I really appreciate that it's still there. You've expanded the reporting and you've grouped things differently. It's much easier, it's much more informative and much easier to follow, I would say. And so thank you for all of that.
Thank you. It's been a big team effort.
That's great. Yeah, you've got some good people on your team. With that, because of the concerns that were raised earlier, I just want to ask, it's clear that many of the projects have been updated. Some of them still have money from prior years, some of which was cash and some of which was bonded. So it's sitting there. I don't know if there's a concise way to say where we are with the planning for that money. For instance, are those projects going to be closed out and the money put back in the debt service fund where it's borrowed? Or is it going to get pulled forward and just spent on similar projects? There may not be a single answer.
The projects are very specifically defined. And so, we can spend up to that authority on a project. And if for whatever reason we don't have to spend that amount of money, then that money gets returned back to the debt service fund.
Okay.
And so if you recall, earlier this year, we had, after quarter one, we discovered we had some additional money in the debt service fund that has allowed us now to do some short-term notes to issue some additional projects and prevent long-term borrowing.
And you know, I appreciate that. So we would expect to see some more of these projects closed out by the time we get the third quarter report then?
I think what's that?
Probably more like fourth quarter report,
Yeah.
I would guess, because of depending on the project, it may be October, November before it finishes. I mean, there's obviously going to be movement in the third quarter report, but I would expect greater movement in the fourth quarter report.
Okay, well, again, you've got a better sense than I do whether those projects were actually finished 2 years ago and the money's just sitting there, or whether there's still activity on them.
I think a lot of the easy wins have already taken place.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I may have some specific questions, but I appreciate that, and appreciate the good news on the projections as well. My caution for all of us would just be to make sure that as we look at these pieces coming in, that whether it's carryover from prior years or excess from this year, ARPA money and so on, that we prioritize it on our core functions so that we can do even better with the CIP especially.
Right, and my information that I provided to Steve as far as guidance as we relate and look at the 5.7 million that's projected is to take a look at what projects we have in the future that we intended to borrow that could be shifted to cash.
Super.
And then, you know, some things like a vehicle that maybe we've wanted to purchase but haven't had the funds cash-wise and would looking to borrow in the future, that we look at that. And so we're going to have a discussion with Public Works and Infrastructure Committee about that when we take up the fleet lease program again, have a discussion about are there vehicles that we want to outright purchase with cash. And so we'll look at that. But I also want to caution is that we've seen great numbers for the first 2 quarters related to our sales tax numbers, but I want to see if that continues over the next quarter, and then I'll feel more comfortable about making recommendations as we enter into the fourth quarter on how we would spend that. And that's typically actually how we handle it. When we're dealing with surplus, we're really looking at the fourth quarter, coming to you with amendment requests to spend portions of that money to make purchases that we feel are worthwhile. We know where our fund balance is right now in that fund, and we're not looking to build the fund balance any further. We're at a position that that money could be utilized for other types of projects and instead of being banked, so that in the long run, we're saving money.
That's great, and I'll get back through this, and I know it can be hard for all of us to toggle between general fund and utilities, but I think in here there are maybe 3 different years where there's $300,000 sitting that were to be for vehicles, for utilities. So hopefully, you know, all of that works out too. Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Wherever you are. I don't even know where to look.
I am not in outer space. I'm here at home.
Councilman Duncan has a question.
Yes, this is
Councilman Duncan.
just a quick, would it be possible, well, I know it's possible, but in the next couple weeks, could you provide us, 10 years would be fine, what our ending balance was the last 10 years? What that was, so I could see when we had surpluses and what that's looked like?
General fund ending balance.
Yes. Yeah. That was all.
Yeah, that'll be at the end of, in our audits.
Yeah.
Councilwoman Ortiz.
Thank you, Mayor. I will look forward to the plug and play sessions because, you know, I've been talking to Jetto and I want to make sure that we are helping not just the people that we want to help, but we are helping everybody because that money is for everybody. So wherever the breakdown is, I want to make a special point to find that. I would agree, Lizone has done a good job in being consistent and being heard. But there's some things that I personally have taken to them and couldn't get them to call certain people back and couldn't get them to help certain people. So I'm going to ride through this one with them because I believe that's what that's there for, that we help everybody that needs help and not those that we feel that we want to help. So I look forward to those sessions as well. Thank you, Mayor.
All right. Other questions or comments? If there is none other, thank you very much for the quarterly financial report and the forecast. We will continue watching these numbers, and we go to our next presentation by the city manager on the ARPA funds.
You gonna bring that up? Yeah. So today I'm going to provide you a brief overview of where the American Rescue Plan Act provides us assistance and give you some basics regarding the program. Oops. Come on. Okay, there we go. So we'll review the basics, cover how we can spend the money, what's eligible, what are the reporting requirements, and then our next steps in our timetable. So, large chunk of money was provided by the federal government to all state and local governments. Topeka will receive $45,676,831 in 2 tranches. That's the way they labeled it in their act. We've got $22,838,415.50 already in funding. So we have equivalent of about half of the money that we were going to receive from this distribution. So the regulations were published. We've been reviewing them. And the bottom line is the city has until December 31 to obligate the money, and then until December 31 of 2026 to actually spend any obligated money. So obviously it's a unique opportunity for us. This is one of those times where it's almost like revenue sharing to a certain extent. There are restrictions. There are things that we can't spend the money on, but there are a lot of things that in the past we've never received money from the federal government that we could spend money on. And I mentioned a few of them, though. For example, lead abatement in homes. We've tried to get a grant for 2 or 3 years and haven't been successful. We have lead service lines. Talked about affordable housing, additional money. There's a host of things that they targeted specifically in this legislation that we can use the money for. So the intention with this money was to respond to the public health emergency and take a look at negative economic impacts. That relates to some of the programs related to homeless, helping people to stay in their home, those types of things. It also addressed revenue loss. That means revenue loss within our general fund as we do the calculations. Now, we know that last year we ended fairly well, and so when we do the calculations, revenue loss is not an option for us. We didn't end up with a revenue loss. Now, we had certain funds, like our parking fund, that had a loss, but unfortunately, they lumped that in with our general fund when they, in their classification, so we don't end up with an overall loss. Premium pay, that means that certain individuals, police, fire, medical people, some others like that, could actually receive premium pay for the time that they worked. From March, when the act was, when the health crisis started, to even into the future through the life of the loans, the money that were provided to be able to spend. So in other words, through December of 2024, we can pay premium pay. And then the last big area is water and sewer and broadband infrastructure. And that is a unique situation. We can go and do work in those areas, but we can't do a road project. But if we do a water project and we have to tear up the road and put it back, we can use the money to replace the road. So that's really looking at coordinating the expenses related to locations that we check to do water mains, sewer mains, that type of thing. Broadband, there is one little component. You know, for us, broadband infrastructure is pretty much in place. There's not a lot that we need that's available for us to consider in that area, to none, I would say, at this point, based on the research that's been done by Public Health and Safety Committee. But there is some possibility that some broadband type things can be done with technical assistance, and so we'll be looking at that as a potential option. So when it comes to public health response, there's many listed things, but because we pretty much The county, in our county, was handled by public health. There aren't many things in this area that we look at as potential options for us to utilize the money. But I want to list them so that you know those are our options. So the bigger area, though, is negative economic impacts. A lot of different things. Help households, individuals. We've already been doing that with our CARES money from COVID basic needs. We've assisted small businesses. That's allowed under ARPA. And to provide general government services. Now, that is a restriction, though, that when you dig into it, is really you can't just pay for staff or different things like that. Aid to impacted industries such as tourism, travel, and hospitality. They have had some programs that have helped them, but this was included in here and allows us that opportunity. And you'll see eventually when we're looking at some things related to that industry that we can help. Tourism, we know our TGT dollars were down. Or do we need to do something to help with that? And then expanded uses in our hardest hit communities. Qualified census tract is a key word as it relates to our ability to help in the area of homelessness, affordable housing, a lead abatement, lead line replacement, and even a violence intervention. I believe the SAVE program is potentially eligible under this definition. So all those things are great that we can do, but we're going to have to show through the data that we have that we're using that in qualified census tracts, and that's going to be key when we do our reporting if we decide to fund some of these areas. So revenue loss, I already covered. There's a little bit of guidance there on how it was calculated, and as you read through that, we did not have a revenue loss, so we won't be pursuing it. Now, that is not that bad of a deal in the fact that based on the ability to spend this money on so many other different areas, we will not have an issue of finding places that we can utilize all of this money before the time frame that's in place. A little more detail when it comes to premium pay for essential workers. Basically, it looks at people that actually were out in the field. You can't give money towards teleworkers. There's limits on how much you can give, and then there's restrictions on it can't be too high. In other words, 150% of the state's average wage. And like I said, you can do it retroactive or future as far as payments. So water and sewer infrastructure. This is a big one. I was really actually surprised that much emphasis was put on this, but that's the way the bill came out. So it's an opportunity for us to take a look at addressing some issues that we have within our system. We know with our CIP that we have many projects that can be done in our water and our sewer infrastructure, both at the plant, with water lines, sewer lines, pump stations, the works. And so there's also a lot of opportunity to make some improvements within our system, maybe potentially not needing to borrow as much money in a given year, depending on tracking what projects we do, that will have an impact on that. There's a lot of talk about lead service lines as an issue, and luckily we are already in the process of doing research as to what lead service lines we have. Braxton and the Utilities Department is already working through identifying where we have lead service lines, and that was a requirement that came down from the federal government for us to identify those. So we were already well on our way, which will then give us some indication of what it's going to cost to be able to work on lead service lines, which is a critical health issue and something that this is a great opportunity to assist with. What that looks like will depend on how much money we want to spend in that area, whether we want to replace the full cost or if we want to have it shared with the property owner. That's more to come in a future discussion. So a little bit more on broadband infrastructure. This was a key component as well. There are locations that we'll probably use, and I've seen news stories about intention purposes that some communities have in addressing this. And so with our situation, with our infrastructure, we're in pretty good shape. But we'll take a look, and if we're aware of any issues, we could look at providing some assistance in that area. So what are some ineligible uses? Well, you can't offset taxes. In other words, you can't take the money and just put it in our general fund and offset how much we'd have to raise for taxes. Can't put it in pension fund. Don't allow that. Can't fund your debt service. In other words, pay off any bonds that we already had, any legal settlements, that type of thing. And you can't use it to match other federal funds that don't allow that. And that's pretty common with a lot of federal grants. And you can't do general infrastructure, which in this case, they're talking about streets primarily. You can't use it to just work on streets. We do have some reporting requirements. We don't have as many as the much larger cities, but we do have more than the non-entitlement cities. Our first report is due August 31st. Finance Department will be handling that. I've already talked with Steve and given him the paperwork to be able to know what he needs to submit. It'll be fairly simple for us because we will not have spent any money it's as of the end of July, and we haven't spent any money. We received it, we put it in the bank, we're earning interest on it, which is allowable under the program. And eventually, but we'll do our first report August 31st. And then after that, we have to do quarterly reports, both project and finance reports. They're due 30 days after each quarter. We have to keep all the records for 5 years. And right now, after discussion with Director Wade, we're going to look at doing them internally at the moment. But this could end up being a lot of projects. And depending on how big of a deal it gets to be, we may look at hiring some external assistance to tackle that as well. But right now, our intent is to do it internally. Steve believes he has the staff that can do that. So what's next? Well, I've been receiving feedback from staff through even just today. I got a couple more notes on options that we can consider as they've delved into it a little further based on what I presented them as an initial list. They're digging into it deeper. I'll be looking to talk with each of you in one-on-one meetings and kind of talk about our preliminary list, talk about things that you may have an interest in seeing included in the funding. And the hope is that between all those create something that by the middle of September we can say this is what we think the list should be. Presenting those amounts to the governing body in October, a little later than October 19th, but it might be earlier depending on how it all comes together. Being very deliberate on this because the standpoint of that there's no hurry. We have lots of time to be able to get this initiated. A lot of the types of projects we're thinking about doing are already on our CIP, so a lot of it's already been identified. We just have to figure out which ones we want to do. But hopefully get your vote on this. I believe this to be no different than a CIP budget. The money is too great. I'm not going to make this decision by myself. You all need to provide me input and make these decisions on where we actually spend this money. But I will provide you, along with staff, all of the information that you might want in order to be able to feel comfortable with where we're spending our money that we've received. The second tranche doesn't come until 2022, so we can't spend more than, well, I guess we could obligate, but we wouldn't necessarily spend more than $22 million this year. I don't see that happening because we're not going to finish the year. So we'll have it all and we'll be able to get all the projects. So I believe that's it. Questions, comments?
Yes.
I know that was a lot of information and that everybody's juices are probably primed, trying to figure out which projects they can start talking to city manager about. Any preliminary comments or questions after this first presentation?
Councilman Duncan.
Understanding that this is going to be the first of many conversations.
Councilman Duncan had his hand up, so does Valdivia Alcala, so does Hiller.
Councilman Duncan, followed by Councilwoman Valdivia Alcala, followed by Councilwoman Hiller.
My question should be simple. I'm just curious, how is obligated defined?
What it would mean would be a project that we bid. So if we bid a water main project, for example, and the bid was accepted and a contract signed in October or November, December of 2024, prior to December 31, it's obligated.
Okay.
And then we would have the next 2 years to actually complete the project and spend all of the money on that
Okay.
project.
Perfect. Thank you.
Councilwoman Valdivia Alcala.
Thank you, Mayor. City Manager, thank you for the presentation. I know that there's a lot of questions in community and a lot of curiosity as to how the funds will be utilized. So this is pretty, to the point and succinct, and it's not very long. So I'm wondering, have you considered putting this on social media so that the public can see it, this presentation here?
Oh, yeah, well, it would be because it's included in the packet. So it would be already right now,
Right.
but we can call it out more specifically,
Yes, that's what
Yeah.
I'm talking about, is, whether that be on Channel 4 or
Yeah,
on our
put a
Facebook
link to-
page,
yeah.
a link, anything of that nature. And also, this is just a question, because I know that I'm going to be asking, constituents about their thoughts on utilization of the funds, but has there been any thoughts to having any type of survey go out to the public?
Well,
I know
think,
that might be kind of
yeah, that.
more than what you may want.
Right, I mean,
but-
it's going to be, the opportunities that are available are pretty broad. So I think what I would say would be when I make the presentation as it relates to the recommended fundings based on input from the governing body and from staff, at that point, seeking public input and having a delay from, that's why I'm looking that December is probably the better time to look at actually approving it, to allow that public input to occur, for everybody to understand truly what's being considered for funding as far as projects or programs, and allow that to occur. It could be a simple survey that's saying, do you like this program, or do you rank, put 10 projects together and rank which ones you think are the highest priority. I can tell you from my initial list that I have about 1/3 of the money going towards social programs to help with impacts within the neighborhoods or within the community, and then about 2/3 going towards infrastructure type projects. So that's kind of where my breakdown is right now.
Okay. Yeah, I kind of think it will be like opening a Pandora's box if you just do just a random survey. But what you're talking about then is bringing it forth and having public input, at a council meeting.
Correct.
I would just suggest that if we do that, to make sure that we really get it out to the public, that this is the time that they can come in and, have their voice heard
Sure.
about it. Because, to the public, our meetings just run on and on sometimes, but if they could know that that would be their date to come in, like with other public hearings, I think that that would be beneficial. Thank you.
Understood.
Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilwoman Hiller.
I just wanted to ask in general, the other thing that's coming down the line, we hear reports about votes on it daily, is the new federal infrastructure bill, which is also huge. The contents of it have been fairly consistent, though. And when I think of public input, I think, we as a council have been trying to prioritize what we were going to do and how to pay for it to get the most out of it. And I hadn't been aware that, just as a for instance, that lead pipes, we've not talked about that in this city to any extent at all. And we've had all these other priorities, so I didn't even know whether it had been sort of way down the line on somebody's list or not even on it. But even if, let's say, we wanted to consider it, if this long-term infrastructure bill is coming in with money for the same things, then partly it's deciding how to prioritize and how to calendar as well, right? It seems like there was a Senate vote on,
Yes, today.
okay,
And an expected House vote in a week.
in a week. So I thank you for that. It seemed like maybe we're getting close to actually a vote. It would be helpful, I think, to all of us as soon as that's done,
Yeah, they
for
could
a
have-
similar presentation, because that's another whole huge opportunity to get things done without borrowing, get them, I think part of the challenge we need to be thinking about is when we've already got this money coming and then the infrastructure money is coming, we only have so much capacity on our staff and in our construction community, let's say, to get projects done. So keeping in mind not only what our priorities are, but how fast we can manage it. That everybody knows my inclination, I think, but substituting money and spending other people's money for a while, but getting that same volume of priorities done might be possible. Or if there is something, and I just throw the lead out because it came up, that we want to do, we wouldn't have to do it right away. if we decided to put it on our list, if it's also in that Infrastructure Act, right?
I don't know, the mayor, did you have a comment?
Those funds have to all be expended, projects completed, and something to show for them by the end of 2024.
The infrastructure bill?
And for the ARPA funds.
I knew the ARPA, but we've got infrastructure coming right in on top of it, was my point.
I know, and I think that there is a desire to get some projects at least going. I don't know the exact date for that one. I've been advocating for it, but I'm not as sure on the date of completion for those.
My point was just that I'm glad that of course, everybody's watching it, but I think we're going to have to consider that simultaneously too to make the best decisions.
The good news, Councilwoman Hiller, is that as city manager and I have been looking at these things, that's been the conversation.
Yeah.
It's trying to figure out how we could maximize, and even if the city of Topeka would have to compete for allocations, which grants are we going to apply for to try to mitigate some of the CIP expenses and CIB expenses that we have already going on.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, and I've heard that lead lines may be an item in the infrastructure bill, but obviously the language is not complete. We need to wait till House gets done, and then maybe it has to go back to the Senate. We'll see. But I think the good news is that with the timeline that I'm proposing at this point, we're going to know if that bill get passed in the month of August, as they predict. The details of that bill will come out, and we'll be able to know where maybe using infrastructure funds that are going to be available to us makes more sense. We don't know whether we're going to get a direct allocation like we did this last time, or are we going to have to compete for a grant? And so is it going to come through the state, or is it going to come directly to us? And those are things that just are an unknown right now. But once we do know them, that will factor in. And I think with the timeline we have, we can be able to modify what we're looking at doing based on other sources.
Thank you.
And I will say too, I didn't mention it earlier, we do still have about 2.5 million of CARES Act money. However, right now, you'll get a report tomorrow. I didn't have time to send it out today. Corey Wright sent me the latest report as it relates to the COVID basic needs, and we're down to about $59,000 left in our COVID basic needs fund. So my intent is to transfer about $400,000 to continue to cover basic needs program based on the changes that occurred. We thought we might be able to go away from the program, but it is, I think, something that we need to keep going based on where currently we're at as it relates to individuals and their needs. I don't know that we'll use all of that, but we need to cover it. And that was what CARES Act money was available for. So I feel like it's the right thing to do to keep that program going, because if you look at the list tomorrow, you'll see we've put out a lot of money to keep people in homes, and it's pretty exciting to see the impact that we've been able to have in the community.
Thank you.
Other questions? Well, City Manager, if there's nobody else raising their hand that I can't see, thank you so much for the presentation. We look forward for the conversation and to see how we're going to make an impact, because make no mistake, I mean, we all have to understand the big responsibility that has been bestowed onto this council and to the future council, which is trying to figure out a way to use these dollars to make the best impact to position our city for continued success. COVID took a lot from us, and this is a great opportunity for us to significantly rebuild our community and position it, most importantly, for success. That being said, we move on to the consent agenda. If the clerk would read.
Items 4A through E are resolutions introduced by Councilmember Karen Hiller granting Topeka United, Cumulus Broadcasting, Celtic Fox, Mater Dei Parish, and VBP Vet Club an exception to the provisions of City of Topeka Code Section 945-170 concerning noise prohibitions. Items 4F through H are resolutions introduced by Councilmember Karen Hiller approving special events for the 2021 St. Patrick's Day Street Party, the Topeka Irish Fest, and the 99.3 Eagle Cruise Night. Item I is an ordinance introduced by City Manager Brent Trout allowing and approving city expenditures for the period of May 29 through June 25, 2021, and enumerating said expenditures therein. J are minutes of the regular meeting of July 27, 2021, and there are no applications.
You have heard the consent agenda. What is the pleasure of the governing body?
Move for approval.
Councilwoman Nager moves for approval. Do we have a second? Councilwoman Ortiz seconds. Comments or question on the consent agenda? Seeing none, we proceed by voting.
Mayor De La Isla,
Yes.
Council Members Hiller,
Yes.
Valdivia Akla,
Yes.
Ortiz,
Yes.
Emerson,
Yes.
Padilla,
Yes.
Nager,
Yes.
Dobler,
Yes.
Duncan,
Yes.
and Lesser.
Yes.
We have 10 yes, motion carries.
I was talking on mute. We move on to the action items. Item A, if the clerk would read.
A is an ordinance introduced by City Manager Brent Tratt authorizing and providing for the issuance of aggregate principal amount of $68,280,000 combined utility refunding and improvement revenue bond series 2021A of the City of Topeka, Kansas, making certain covenants and agreements to provide for the payment and security thereof, and authorizing certain other documents and actions in connection therewith.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. So today was a significant event for our city, the borrowing of money to refinance a number of bonds that were in the past in order to save interest money for the future, and then also to fund projects that we have for coming up in the next year. So our funding process, I'm going to turn it over to Director Wade and have him go through the projects. Since we had a refunding amount and we also had a list of projects, we're going to have him review some of the details so that others can understand what we are actually approving tonight as far as funding. We also have Kevin Cowan, our legal representative, and then also Kaylin Dwyer from our financial consultant that are here to be able to provide additional information when it comes to the sale. So, Steve?
So today we had two bond issuances, A and B, and we'll get into that here in a minute. In the first one, we had an issuance of new projects for $27,625,000. That includes new projects as well as the last payments on projects that were in progress. So I think there was some questions in which case, was the money on a line item specific for everything on that project? The answer to that is no. It's the last part of it. So of new projects, 27,625. Of that $68 million in the first one, we have SRF loans that were repaid and a refinancing on a separate set. Kaylin, you want to expand on that?
No, you've covered the meat of it so far, Steve. Happy to jump in if you'd like. I can discuss the sales as well, but I don't want to interrupt you if you've got more to discuss.
No, Kaylin, that's fine.
Okay, great. Yeah. So good evening, Madam Mayor, City Council. Kaylin Dwyer here with Columbia Capital Management, the city's financial advisor. So as Brent and Steve have indicated here, we've got some exciting news, some good news. We sold two series of revenue bonds, one for $68 million and one for $15 million. The $68 million traditional revenue bond, Series 2021A, the bulk of that, as Brent and Steve alluded to, was to refinance certain of the city's, the combined utilities' existing debt. Specifically, the city refinanced its 2013 A bonds, the refinancing of which produced savings of $3.1 million on a present value basis. The city also refunded its existing SRF loans that it had through the state. It had, as of today, about $20 million in SRF loans outstanding, with interest rates ranging from 2.5% to 3.5% roughly. In today's market environment, it made sense to refund those on an economic basis because we could borrow, the city could borrow for much less than 2.5% or 3.5%. So we refunded those, which totaled $20 million, and that saved the city $1 million alone. We did not, as part of any of these refundings, extend the life of any of these bonds. So we maintained the existing footprint and structured the savings so that it would be level. over the life of each respective footprint of both all 8 SRF loans or state revolving fund loans that were refunded, plus the 2013A bonds. So that covers the Series 2013A bonds. The second auction was the Series 2013B bonds, which is a taxable series of bonds that were issued to fund the city's biogas project. Since this is a unique project, separate from the city's traditional utility infrastructure needs, we issued these bonds on a separate lien. So these bonds are still payable from the city's utility revenues, but the payments on this debt is subordinate to or junior to the city's traditional parity lien bonds. So the 2021A bonds plus all the other outstanding revenue bonds. These 2021B bonds, like I said, are subordinate to those bonds. By having these on a separate lien structure, it allows us to avoid unnecessarily diminishing the city's capacity to borrow on its primary lien structure moving forward. As you all are intimately familiar with the city CIP, there's an extensive list of potential utility projects both this year and in years moving ahead. To the extent any of those projects or portions of those projects will require bond funding, and it makes sense to borrow on a parity lien basis to minimize the interest cost. By putting the biogas project on a separate tier, we help to maintain as much senior lien borrowing capacity as possible, and also avoid debt service coverage pressure or rating pressure and the potential for a downgrade. So this new tier, which is subordinate to the city's traditional bonds, is rated one notch below from a credit rating perspective. So the city's combined utility revenue bonds are rated AA3, and these new bonds are rated A1, like I said, which is one notch below, which is where we would have expected it to end up based on the technicals here. So with that said, the Series 2021A bonds had 6 bidders show up. Those bonds were purchased by Robert W. Baird. The 2021B junior lien bonds had 2 bidders show up. Again, Baird was the lowest bidder, and city council members, you should have in front of you a summary of the auction results listing the bidders and the respective interest rates bid for each of those auctions. So I think that just about covers it. Happy to pass the baton back to Steve.
Kevin, anything that you wanted to add to that?
Only a couple of things. Good evening, Kevin Cowan with Gilmore and Bell, City's Bond Council. One thing that's a little different than in years past, and Kaylin referenced this, that the bonds were bid with bond insurance. So there are going to be some bond insurance provisions in these documents. And from my perspective on a public sale like this, it is unique and good news when somebody bids bond insurance. Typically, a bond insurer will have a number of requirements that they will impose on the city, and here with a public sale, that was not the case. So all of the document provisions that had already been built in on the parity lien and the junior lien status were accepted by the bond insurance company, and so we didn't have to add any additional covenants or bond provisions that were any different than what the city had already agreed to. And to me, that was unique and interesting and good, that you have bond insurance that was bid on these, and you don't have to change any of your bond covenants or provisions. And that's really all I was going to add. Obviously, the sale results I thought were fantastic.
The only thing I might add into this is today's sale covered 14 different projects. 14 different projects with the new issuances of a total of 41,625,000 of new project.
This is incredible, Steve. Here we have another saving of yet another $1 million that future generations are not going to have to pay. It's, I don't know, I'm a numbers geek, so I get excited. I know that we have somebody signed up for public comment, so before we go into discussion, Mr. Joseph Ledbetter, you're signed up for this item.
Well, thank you. We get to speak after the fact. Joe Ledbetter. I think one of the things I'm going to address is a comment that was just made. The best thing is cash. You pay no interest, and there is no cash to future generations on that kind of thing. We have some pretty good reserves, high reserves. One of the questions that was posed to me today when I was discussing this was, well, how much money do we have to hold back in reserves from the money we borrow? Now, borrowing the $20 million to pay off KDHE, I have no problem with. But when I'm looking at these documents I was sent today by finance explaining some of the projects we're going to do, they're very glib. $6.1 million for water main replacement lines, but we don't know where they are. And so people keep referring back to the CIP. I said, well, then why isn't it in your CIP? Surely you could show me that. We know how much trouble we just had with the CIP budget and how we had inaccuracies and it drug on because it was not vetted properly, and we needed more time to get questions answered, not just from the public like me, but from the council themselves. Questions were being ignored. Bond amounts were being ignored. Let's explain where we're at today. Before we did this bond issue, we were at $272 million in revenue bond debt for the city of Topeka. At the rate we're going, if we continue the path that we're on, we will have doubled that again in 5 years. My biggest problem with this is we don't have the capacity to even do these projects a lot of times. We see water mains that should have been bid out last year that aren't bid out till this year, and we don't know if they're ever going to get caught up. And I'm not here to pick on people. I just know what I see and what I observe as I drive around this town and what I hear from people. We have way too many water breaks, and we have budgeted money of almost $6.5 million per year, and yet the capacity is not there to get even half that done from the numbers I've seen of actual contracts that are being let this year. So I too am a numbers guy, and I like to talk in real numbers and about what's real. So yeah, you can borrow money and keep borrowing money. Somebody gets to pay it back. But at some point, we need real projects that actually save us money. And I think, and I'm going to do some more research on the way these bonds are structured as to how the money specifically has to be spent on those projects. I'm sure there's a little area of, looseness, but it can't be too loose. I've talked to other people that are more familiar with bonds, and they say the faith and credit of the city has to be doing those projects and have to be doing them in a timely fashion. I'm not saying there's not a grace period, but I don't think we should be borrowing this amount of money. I think that we have sufficient reserves and sufficient money in cash and COVID money coming in that we could have probably passed on some of this. Like I say, if you want to borrow to pay off KDHE for a lower rate, that makes sense. That's fine. But I know that the last time I came up here and questioned these, I was told by bond counsel that we had actually paid interest and carried it forward with the bonds from temporary notes we took out. Now, I didn't see temporary notes in this issue. I also noticed that it was $77 million in the original ordinance, and that's been dropped down to $68 million. So I was told somebody found some cash to pay down some other projects. We didn't need that full amount. But that's in the writing of the ordinance. I went and looked at it today. So there's a $9 million difference. So somebody found the money. Anyway, it's already done. Nothing else to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you. Comments or discussion?
Mayor?
Councilwoman Heller.
Thank you. I had a hard time hearing in the beginning, and so if I could ask again, on the bigger of the issuances, again, on Mr. Ledbetter's question, it started at 77 and then we backed it off to 68. And that was by finding cash that we had available.
Steve, you want to address that?
Yeah, I think Braxton's here too. Utilities, we had some, when we looked at end of year, there was the ability to pay some cash towards some projects.
Great. And then there was 27,625 in new projects
On the Series A.
on the Series A, and then I caught that there was 20 million in SRF refinancing,
About that, yes.
and then the rest of it was another 20 million roughly.
For 2013 Series A refinance?
Those are two different things then?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So both of those were refinancing, basically.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is Caleb at Columbia Capital. In case I didn't say the amount initially, the 2013A refinancing was an additional savings of $3.1 million. So there's $3.1 million in refinancing savings plus the $1 million in savings from refunding the KDHE loans.
Thank you, because the savings is on this summary sheet, but not what it was from, and just trying to understand. And if I could ask one more question, why do we need bond insurance? What's that all about?
So we don't. So what we do when we sell these bonds is that we let the market decide. So we simply say, hey, the city's selling X number of bonds on this date. The bank that shows up and offers the lowest interest rate, lowest cost of funds for the city wins the bonds. Now, we allow underwriters to bid with bond insurance if they feel like they can market the bonds easier, and that cost savings gets passed down to the city, because with bond insurance, perhaps a safer bond means a lower interest rate for an investor. But we caveat that with the underwriter has to pay for that insurance. So we can allow underwriters to bid with bond insurance, but irrespective of whether or not any bid has bond insurance, we go with the bid that produces the lowest all-in cost of funds for the city. And in this case, and I think it's the first time in this case, at least in recent memory, that the winning bidder did include bond insurance with its bid. I can say from experience, so I also work with the state of Kansas. Wichita State University was recently in the market with the financing, and the winning bid on that deal also had insurance. I believe Wichita State University shares the same rating as the city in this instance, AA3. So that AA3 credit rating might be a sweet spot for the economics of bond insurance, where it makes sense for investors. And so that's why underwriters have been including that in their bids recently. Does that clarify that, Councilwoman Hill?
Yeah, it was just new to me, so one other observation, I appreciate being sent the Moody's, the actual assessments that they had. And I did see in there that they were cautioning us that we're pushing up on how much we're bonding in terms of putting even that AAA3 in rating in jeopardy. So I appreciate sharing that and the efforts that have already happened and that we're talking about to get it back down. Thank you.
Mayor,
Other
if I
comments,
could-
question?
Yeah,
Yes,
Mayor.
absolutely, Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess this would be to one of the bond guys on the line here. I see in here, and you mentioned in your presentation, that we refinanced a couple different types of bonds. And I see you say present value savings. I guess I just want some reassurance that you're taking into account that oftentimes we're lengthening the period of borrowing, correct?
No, so when we refinance debt, we don't extend the length of the loan. So the portion of the bonds that's allocable to the respective refunding components, that maintains the existing amortization of the bonds that we're taking out. So for instance, these SRF loans, they all had various maturities, but some of them went a few years longer, 2 or 3, some went maybe 7 years longer. In each instance, when we issued bonds to take out those loans, we matched the footprint of that amortization so that we weren't extending the life of any of that debt.
Okay, fantastic. And just as a follow-up, I noticed in this case, and maybe this has been the case before, I just haven't noticed, that the underwriter in this case did win both auctions. Is that unusual, or is that normal, or?
So it's not unusual for Baird. So Baird is a broker-dealer based out of Milwaukee, and it's effectively a conglomerate of folks, I think, that bid and bid with Baird Syndicate. But they've been extremely competitive over the past few years, not just on the city's bonds, but other bonds with clients that we work with. So like I said earlier, we say, hey, the city's selling X number of bonds on this state, and we let the market do the work and determine who's going to provide the lowest cost of funds. In this region, Baird has been very, very competitive over the past few years. So it's an interesting observation, and I agree. But it's our job to secure the lowest cost of funds for the city, and in this case, the bank that did it happened to be the same bank for both series of bonds.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Other questions?
Madam Mayor, I don't know if you were able to receive this at home or not, but the results of the bond auction, one thing in particular of note, the winning bond bid for the Series A was less than 1.73%.
Wow. Councilwoman Hiller?
Along those lines, though, we chose to go with a bond that would cost more for the smaller issue, just to leave room in that more attractive bucket, if you will.
Kalen?
Yeah. So to distinguish the biogas project from the more traditional projects, and those bonds also had to be issued on a taxable basis because of the nature of the project, and the fact that those tax credits are going to be potentially producing revenue. And if we dive too far into legal weeds here, I'll have to pass the baton to Kevin Cowan, the city's bond counsel. But for a variety of reasons, those bonds had to be taxable. So we had to have a separate series. And like I said earlier, to distinguish those bonds from the city's traditional projects and to not put too much unnecessary stress on that primary parity lien, as you indicated, Councilwoman Hiller, Moody's has already indicated that the city's debt burden is growing, and it's well aware of that. The city's credit rating is stable at this point, but they're keeping an eye on that. So to minimize the ongoing impact to that primary lien, we issued the biogas projects on a separate sub-lien, and so those bonds are subordinate to payment to the primary bonds. Does that answer that?
Thank you.
Okay.
Additional comments or questions before we proceed with the vote? Okay, we proceed by voting.
Councilmembers Hiller,
Yes.
Valdivia Aquila,
Yes.
Have a motion or something.
Point of order.
We sure did. What a good idea.
Mayor, I don't think we had a motion, did we, and a
We did not.
second?
Point of order.
We did not. Thanks for that point of order. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Councilman Emerson, thank you for bringing it up and bringing the motion. Do we have a
The
second?
city manager is also making some noises. So.
City manager, comments and discussion.
What?
I just said you
Okay.
also.
Yeah, I was leaning forward to say it as Councilman Emerson was saying it, so we're good. And
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor seconded it.
Okay, so now we have a motion, we have a second, and now officially we can proceed by voting.
Councilmembers Hiller,
Yes.
Valdivia Aquila,
Yes.
Ortiz,
Yes.
Emerson,
Yes.
Padilla,
Yes.
Nager,
Yes.
Dobler,
Yes.
Duncan,
Yes.
Lesser,
Yes.
and Mayor De La Isla.
Yes.
We have 10 yes, motion carries.
Now we move on to item B, which is related to the same item that we were just discussing.
B is a resolution introduced by City Manager Brent Trapp prescribing the form and details and authorizing and directing the sale and delivery of aggregate principal amount of the $68,280,000 combined utility refunding and improvement revenue bond series 2021A of the City of Topeka, Kansas, previously authorized by the ordinance of the issuer, making certain covenants and agreements to provide for the payment and security thereof, and authorizing certain other documents and actions connected therewith.
City Manager.
I have nothing further to add. I think we covered it in the previous item.
I think we did as well. If there's no additional conversation with regards to this item, I would accept a motion.
Move approval.
We have a motion by Councilman Dobler. Do we have a second?
I will second.
Thank you, Councilwoman Nager, seconds. There's no additional comments or questions. We proceed by voting.
Council members Valdivia Aquila,
Yes.
Ortiz,
Yes.
Emerson,
Yes.
Padilla,
Yes.
Nager,
Yes.
Dobler,
Yes.
Duncan,
Yes.
Lesser,
Yes.
Mayor De La Isla,
Yes.
and Councilmember Hiller.
Yes.
We have 10 yes, motion carries.
We now move on to item C, if the clerk would read.
C is an ordinance introduced by City Manager Brent Trout authorizing and providing for the issuance of $14,990,000 aggregate principal amount of taxable combined utility junior lien revenue bonds, Series 2021B of the City of Topeka, Kansas, making certain covenants and agreements to provide for the payment and security thereof, and authorizing certain other documents and actions in connection therewith.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. So this was the item that related to the biogas project where we sold these as taxable bonds, and we've discussed the amount of funding that would go towards that and the reasons why for. If there's any further questions, are available.
Questions for our team? If there's no questions, what is the pleasure of the body? Actually, we do have somebody signed up for public comment. Mr. Joseph Ledbetter signed up to speak on this item.
Well, again, thank you. The bonds have already been sold, so we're basically doing housekeeping. But what I found interesting about this particular bond issuance, which I wish they would not have taken on at this time, was I was looking at the esteemed Bartlett and West notes to this project, which I believe are accurate. And so it's my understanding we took out 30-year notes, right? Okay, that's a yes. And yet, when I look at the payback of the capital investment, debt service, and operational expenses, it doesn't pay off until year 34. So that's a difference of about 13 and not quite a 0.5% difference. So I guess what struck me was maybe these should have been 35-year bonds. I guess they go up to 40. No, I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying that this is another reason that it probably would have helped to put some cash infusion into this project if it was that worthwhile. And I'm not going to argue whether it was or wasn't. I don't know the details. I'm told we have a contract now signed for an actual buyer. I know when this was first being discussed, they did not. And so hopefully all that's contracted and of record to buy the gas. And hopefully we'll be able to pay back these revenue bonds in 34 years, as the Bartlett and West note says. I don't know if that went into the bond documents or if they saw that or even asked for it, but anyway, I would believe that these documents are accurate based on the engineering firm. Thank you.
Additional comments or questions?
Mr. Dobler has his.
Councilman Dobler?
City Manager, I don't know if you can answer this question, but how many projects do we do that actually have a payback period?
Not very many, if ever.
Thank you.
Additional comments or questions? Being none, is there a motion?
Mayor, move to approve.
Councilman Emerson moves to approve. Do we have a second by Councilwoman Ortiz? Seconds the motion. Additional comments or questions at this time? Seeing none, we proceed by voting.
Council members Ortiz,
Yes.
Emerson,
Yes.
Padilla,
Yes.
Nager,
Yes.
Dobler,
Yes.
Duncan,
Yes.
Lesser,
Yes.
Mayor De La Isla,
Yes.
Council members Hiller,
Yes.
and Valdivia Aquila.
Yes.
We have 10 yes, motion carries.
We now move on to item D, which is another pro forma to complete the prior resolution, if the clerk would read.
D is a resolution introduced by City Manager Brent Trout authorizing and providing for the issuance of $14,990,000 aggregate principal amount of taxable combined utility junior lien revenue bonds, Series 2021B of the City of Topeka, Kansas, previously authorized by the ordinance of the issuer, making certain covenants and agreements to provide for the payment and security thereof, and authorizing certain other documents and actions connected therewith.
City Manager.
Only one comment. There was mention as to whether or not we have a contract. We do have a contract with Southern Star for the purchase of the gas, and that project to install the pipeline continues to be worked on. So we do have that component that is being moved forward.
Okay. If there's no questions, there's nobody signed up to speak for this item specifically. What is the pleasure of the governing body? Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
We have a motion for approval. Is that Deputy Mayor?
Yes.
Do we have a second? Second by Councilwoman Nager. At this point in time, if there's no additional comments or questions, we proceed by voting.
Council members Emerson,
Yes.
Padilla,
Yes.
Nager,
Yes.
Dobler,
Yes.
Duncan,
Yes.
Lesser,
Yes.
Mayor De La Isla,
Yes.
Council members Hiller,
Yes.
Valdivia Aquila,
Yes.
and Ortiz.
Yes.
We have 10 yes, motion carries.
We now move on to item E, if the clerk would read.
E is a public hearing to obtain citizen input on the City of Topeka's 2022 Annual Consolidated Action Plan and approval of the 2022 Annual Consolidated Action Budget.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. So we discussed this last week. It was a discussion item. The one change that has occurred since then in the document which you received today, which is that Cent was approved as a CHOTO, and so that modification has been made within the documents in a number of locations, and those were noted by the city clerk. So with that, Corey Wright, Director of Housing and Services, is here and available if there are any questions. Otherwise, we seek approval of the Consolidated Action Plan.
Questions or comments for Ms. Wright?
Councilwoman Valdivia Aquila has her hand up.
Councilwoman Valdivia Alcala.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm not sure how to, if I ask these questions right now or maybe later, if this is our only time for discussion on this before the vote. And then is there public comment after this as well?
Unless
I just
someone has
wanted to-
signed up.
I was going to bring public comment right after you spoke.
Okay.
And then allow more discussion from the council. Then after that, we have a chance to have a motion and a second, and at that point, we have another chance for discussion.
Okay, thank you, Mayor, for that clarification. I was a bit fuzzy on that. I guess my question to Corey is going to be, can you tell me about, was there quite a bit of public input for, oh, there you are, for during the public hearing dates and times for the Con Action Plan?
Most of the public input came from the Citizens Advisory Council and the Homeless Task Force meeting. We had a few one-on-one meetings for people who couldn't attend by Zoom, and then just a few handful of people for each of the Zoom meetings.
Were any of those comments or the input or the suggestions added into and changing up a bit the plan that we're looking at now?
Yes, ma'am. The CAC had 3 meetings, as was mentioned. They looked at several things the first 2 meetings. I took the input from the Homeless Task Force and the CAC, put a tally together of what the input was saying, and then made a recommendation, which they then approved, but it was solely based on that input.
And in a nutshell, can you just give us what that was?
Yeah. There was, and I'm sorry I don't have the exacts, but there was a decrease in our tenant-based rental assistance. That was largely due to the fact that Shelter Plus Care has a waiting list right now. So tenant-based rental assistance is deposit assistance for those Shelter Plus Care folks. So since we have that waiting list, we're not using that much. So we took $25,000, right around $25,000 out of that. We moved that to major rehab, and that was largely, thank you, appreciate that. That was largely due to the increase of construction right now, construction costs. So we moved that there. We decreased weatherization by 17,000, right around 17,000. So that's at 60,000. The weatherization, as you know, is a partnership with Community Action, and that just kicked off just a few months ago due to all the COVID money that we received. We were a little delayed getting that started. And then we increased the anti-blight budget by 9,000. That was mainly for contractual reasons. In order to keep that inmate crew, we needed to increase that budget to pay for the staff salaries for that.
Okay, tell me that last sentence for the inmate crew.
Yes, the inmate, 9,000 we increased.
Okay. I do have a couple of questions about the inmate crew. The inmate program in total, I was looking at, there was 120,000, and then I thought I saw 297,000. How much does that program in the plan, how much does that cost annually? The inmate program?
Yeah, so there's the anti-blight. If you look at that budget, the anti-blight is inmate programs, and then there's an inmate program line item, so those two combined.
So I think I saw 297 and 120. So something like that altogether. And I think at another meeting, we had determined that the inmates are paid. Is that correct?
So the city manager might have more input on how the changes that are happening recently, but it is competitive now. This next year will be competitive. However, I think there's plans in the works for figuring out how to keep the inmate program without us paying them.
Without you paying the inmates?
Yes.
How much are they currently paid?
I don't
Just
know.
rough, just a guess.
$10 an hour.
Boss, I've got it.
$10 an hour?
Got it.
Okay. I just want to go back to some questions I had, because I want to make sure that this is coming from the 5-year con plan, is that one of the best ways to lift out of poverty is through quality education, training, and employment opportunities. And then it goes on to say that the comp plan states that economic growth and prosperity requires a well-trained workforce, and that the city will continue to allocate resources to enhance self-sufficiency and link education and training with economic opportunity. Then it also goes to talk about the 5-year con plan. The median income for African-American households in Topeka is $30,000, and that's approximately 2/3 of the citywide median. And more than half of the households were low and moderate income, and minority households were concentrated in older areas of the city. In addition, more than 2/3 of African-American households in the city of Topeka rent a home, which is deemed higher than the citywide average. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up, just so we can dialogue a little bit on this inmate and program that you guys have had, that the city has had for a while, and also some suggestions, which I believe are very relevant, that have come from Lizone Grays. is I want to say first and foremost, this is not preferential treatment. This is actually called equity. And, you know, if people don't know what that definition is, they might want to look it up. This is not preferential treatment towards Black Americans or brown Americans or white Americans. This is equity. And this is something that comes out in the affordable housing study, and this is something that comes out by the city itself in this plan. So when I looked at the information that was brought forth by Mr. Grays on the possibility of moving those dollars of $297,000 and $120,000, give or take, into actually going to set up programs in these LMI areas that we're talking about. And the feedback, you know, I guess, you know, the feedback was considered, but it was nixed. And I know that we're always looking for a good deal, you know, for people to come and cut our grass and to handle blight and all of that. But I want to get an understanding of if there ever has been any serious consideration to a plan, like not just Lizone Grays, I'm sure it's from other people, about stopping the use of inmate labor and starting to put those dollars into LMI communities where studies that we have done ourselves show that there is a need. If that infrastructure to help those LMI folks, Black, brown, or white, but we know there's inequity here, has that ever been considered seriously?
Well, I think when we look at the programs that we have with the inmate and the removal of the blight, the amount of stuff that's removed from our community by them has been deemed very important to the neighbors. The neighborhoods want to see that stuff removed, and the best way for the city to be able to do it so far has been to utilize those crews. If we had to pay individuals in order to be able to do that, it would be much more expensive, and I'm not sure how much we would be able to get accomplished. And that seems counterproductive, but we're also trying to figure out how we make it work and accomplish the mission that we've had in order to clean up our communities and our neighborhoods. And so that's the purpose of the blight money that's put aside there, and the method that we've used so far has been the inmate crews. Now, with the changes that occurred, that has now become a more expensive program. Still a better program than if we had to hire individuals based on the analysis the staff did, if we were to hire individuals or to hire companies to complete that work. And so that's where we're at right now with, in order to keep our neighborhoods clean, that's the method that we've chosen at this point.
Okay, I'm just saying that I'm asking, has there ever been any cost analysis done comparing what it would be to have a third-party contractor come in and do that versus what you're spending now?
Yes.
And really starting to invest? We've already said when it comes to the diversity vendor that, you know, for 30 years, we've been trying to get the diversity vendor program up to par, and it still is not up to par. That's long before you, Brent.
Yeah.
We've talked about that. That's long before you. But now we're also looking at affordable housing study, the consolidated action plan study, whatever, that keeps going back to the same things, and we're not talking about it in a way that makes tangible movement in that way. So I understand, and also there have been reports that this $10 an hour that the inmates may get paid, by the time dollars are taken out of that, that may not even be what they're getting. So I want to understand how we can look out of the box, look at a more proactive way of investing, not only in grass, not only in blight, but also investing in the future, which is our Black, brown, and LMI white communities as well.
But I'm not sure that we can do both at the same time with the money we currently have available. If we want to keep our neighborhoods clean, we've got a component that we have to fund. If we want to do what you're talking about job training and getting people that experience, that's additional funding in order to be able to do. The study has been done. Monique did a look because we weren't sure we were going to get crews back. And so therefore she looked at the numbers that it was going to cost to contract hire the cleaning of these areas, and it was way, way more than what we're currently able to fund.
I would like to see that.
Sure.
I would like to see that. And also, we're looking, I mean, I understand with public health and safety, we are looking at ways on how we look at code enforcement, how we look at blight, all of this. I think that we can walk and chew gum at the same time. So I think that we can seriously entertain looking at these issues, because when it comes down to it, if we don't start investing in all of our people in equity, not favoritism, equity, then is it really going to matter how our neighborhoods look? Because nobody's going to be able to afford in these underserved districts to live in them, and somebody else is going to come and live in them. So that's what I'm saying. And I would like to see that comparison. And I'm disappointed that these things don't even come up for serious dialogue. So, thank you, Corey.
There will be a full presentation related to our inmate crews and so forth at the next council meeting as it relates to the budget component of the meeting. So we'll be able to provide much more detail.
Before we have additional discussion, I would like to call Mr. Lazone Grace to the podium.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and City Council members and everyone in the room and everything. My name's Lazone Grace. I did submit a written public comment, and I thank Councilwoman Alcala for referencing our conversations. This isn't the first time that I have proposed that these dollars specific for this program be reappropriated for a better means. I've always stuck to transitional jobs, which is a good opportunity. And I hope that that study that you're speaking to is a public document, because I think that if you just look at the traditional contracting procurement of contracting that program out to a company, it may be higher. But what I have seen, and I have proposed this probably even since Mr. Bonaparte was the city manager, of reappropriating these funds in a way to whereas individuals in the community that we want working, paying child support, being able to pay their own rent, pay their own car notes, that it is almost better for them to be making $10 an hour so that they don't get in trouble and they can move forward than providing a small stipend of monies for individuals who are inmates. I believe that the city does not leverage all of the resources available. I do see in here, I was on the first one on the background, leveraging federal resources, but there's been sort of a lack of leveraging state resources too. Many of the non-custodial fathers and single parents receiving assistance from DCF, there's job training dollars that can subsidize programs such as this. There are federal job training dollars under the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act that can be a part of subsidizing some of this. If you don't understand where those other dollars and what they can do, then it may seem like something high that they can do, but there are several programs and opportunities and support services that are available to people when they're in a structured program. A transitional jobs program is something that it may be a great program for the inmates, but have they provided any support services? Well, they're in jail, so therefore expungement is not probably, in the picture. But no different than the Impact Avenues program. That it is a better model that we can help homeless people when there's wraparound services. So it's not just individuals getting out and going to work. It's also linking them up with the other organizations and providers in the community, providing them the type of support services so they can advance in the community and not get in trouble, And so I don't think that all the information is out there. In this conversation, way before Mr. Trout came along, there has been no identifiable document that says that it would cost more if it was a transitional jobs program. I think of it more like a social enterprise program. Somebody is getting paid. It's not asking for any more money. The $120,000 is already appropriated. But at some point, we have to move beyond, well, that's just the way it's always been done. Because we're going to continue to keep getting these statistics and the data that I bring that is disparate in unemployment, poverty. I personally think that you can get a better bang for the buck for those individuals who are receiving public assistance, who are not in jail, and making this targeted for them and getting them taken care of and then taking care of the others, other than taking care of people that, can they actually get a job with the companies that get contracted to pay to do this actual type of work with their crime convictions? What other support services are these individuals getting? Or are they just getting this here, then getting out, and then walking around the community unemployed? I guess I got questions. I'd like answers. Thank you.
Mayor?
Yes, Councilman Emerson.
Mr. Graves, I'm sorry, but did you say you sent us a document just recently? I'm sorry, I don't mean to.
I sent my comments into the proper protocols that it said that it was, and if it was shared,
Okay.
with them. I do not know. I have not seen the updated document, but
To the document where the consolidated action plan.
yes. So
not
I
to us
don't know
to-
if any
okay.
of my recommendations were added to that or not.
Okay,
I don't
thank you.
think that
I
they
thought
were.
you meant you sent us something to the council.
No, I thought that if I sent it to you, you all would have had that document.
Yeah, I don't,
We have the con plan.
right. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Okay, so additional discussion on this item.
Mayor?
If there's no, yes.
Quick question. I don't know if it really has to do with this, but just taking all of the discussion that we've had in the last 10 minutes or so into account, we're not talking about a whole lot of dollars here. A while ago, we talked about a whole lot of dollars, 47 million, with a third of that going towards social services. I've seen the list, and I can't remember exactly where all that's going, but certainly seems like an opportunity to point some of those dollars
Yeah,
to
and-
filling some of the gaps that we're talking about here.
Right, and there actually is a program in my preliminary list called Wheels of Change, which is similar to a program that Chief of Staff has been working with some individuals on that would potentially fund that. And I could pull the list and tell you, let's see how much I have. There's actually about 500,000 that I put in for the Wheels of Change program that would fund it for a 3-year period. So the comment that you made, we are looking at that as a potential program that we would fund under our.
You know, I've had the opportunity to work with Mr. Graves on broadband for the last, almost the last year, it seems like. He's got a lot of knowledge about programs, a lot more than I do. So as we get into where to spend those funds, I'd certainly suggest that he gets involved.
Right.
Thank you.
Additional comments or questions?
Yes.
Councilwoman Valdivia Alcala.
Thank you, Mayor. The Wheels of Change, doesn't that have to do with people with records, et cetera, or is it, is this the one that I missed the meeting? Homeless, homeless, okay. Well, so is this kind of what we're talking about with what we're talking about? Are we all on the same page here?
It could be the same program. I mean, I think there is money that I'm setting aside in the Wheels of Change, which is intended to help those individuals that don't have skills, gain skills that then make them more marketable to be able to get another job.
Okay,
And so that's what the Wheels of Change program is really intended. Now, it could be individuals that are homeless, it could be individuals that are already without a job or unemployed or whatever, but the intent is that it provides them a job. They do work within the city, such as cleaning up the city, mowing grass in places that we need it, and developing other skills that then they can utilize to make themselves marketable to be able to get a full-time job.
okay. So that could be then referring to some of the
Yes.
folks, the people that Lazone and myself are referring to. And
Yes, it would
Okay.
definitely attract
Okay.
individuals that are in that classification.
So I wish you would have told me that instead of waiting for Neil to ask and then for you to tell him, okay,
Well,
and
but-
for me to be here. What? That's upsetting.
Well, the programs are not released yet, and it is something that we're working on, and I'm working on as I meet with individual council members, starting to discuss the potential projects that could be done.
Got it. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. If there's no additional comments or questions, what is the pleasure of the governing body?
Councilwoman. Mayor,
Yes?
may I say something? This is a public hearing. I just want to make sure that if there's
true story.
anybody on Zoom or anyone in the audience who maybe didn't sign up, this is now their opportunity to speak.
Mary gave the first announcement. I'm opening up the floor again a second time. Anybody that would like to speak to this item?
Can anyone hear me?
Ms. Jonice, yes.
Yes. Well, thank you for taking the time to hear me. One thing on the amount of money that the inmates have received, I don't know how big of a change it's been since the year 2014, but I do know of someone who was going through that program as an inmate, and the only thing they ended up getting for their salary at the end of it was 30 cents per hour after all deductions were taken out.
Thank you for your comment.
No problem. Hope that can be of help.
Other individuals that would like to speak?
Mayor, this is Susan McClarty. May I speak, please? Thank you.
Yes.
I had some questions with regard to affordable housing. I know that we had a presentation last week from the Topeka Rescue Mission on the tiny house villages. And so I was just wanting to know where the council was wanting to go with that, or whether they're entertaining some additional feedback or looking to go forward with something like that. And I was wanting to know, like, where are those discussions of the key considerations to define the affordable housing, where that's going to be. And I'm thinking such things like building costs. We know what the building costs were for that particular project, but I think there's some other things that were kind of missed or were absent from what I saw anyway from the presentation. It was like monthly ownership costs, thermal comfort, income generation potential, jobs and careers, disposable income, accessibility and necessity amenities of that was covered as well in that presentation, though. And then access to funds. I know that they were looking for the Affordable Trust Fund for some of that funding. I also was wanting to know, like, the standard of housing. I don't feel like we've really gotten down to having discussions about what we're talking about when we talk about the standard of housing, when we're talking to consider such things as like the internal physical and health conditions, the structural defects and overcrowding situations that we have. And also, has anyone researched the micro shelter living or tiny homes that are established within the weather temperature zone and the ecoclimate that we have, so that we can benchmark all of that as well as when we think about affordable housing?
Thank you.
Mayor.
That's all I have.
Mayor, if I could.
Absolutely, City Manager.
Chief of Staff Cochran has had a meeting as of yesterday with Barry Feeker related to that project, and he says he has some additional information that he can provide.
Mayor, Council, City Manager. Yeah, we had a conversation yesterday, and Bill Persinger was also present. That project is in the very infantile stages, and what I can tell you is what we're looking for overall is whether the City Council and the city, that is something that we would be interested in entertaining here in the City of Topeka. We're not talking about allocating funds from the City of Topeka or anything like that. There could be some infrastructure dollars down the road that we'd be talking about. But all those studies, the climate and all that stuff, all that's been done, all that stuff is out there. But that project is, like I said, in the very infantile stages. The MAP program that was discussed talks about all the wraparound services, and it deals with a lot of those things. So this project is far from a done deal, and there's a lot of work that's still to be done on it. As far as Affordable Housing Act dollars, really not looking at any of those dollars being allocated for that project. That project, for the most part, will be funded from private dollars.
Thank you. Additional individuals that would like to speak to this item? This is a third and final call. With this third and final call, the public hearing is closed.
Mayor?
Yes, ma'am.
Because the issue about workforce has come up, I'll give Lazone credit for this advancement as well. I've been involved, the city doesn't do all these things. Sometimes it's a nonprofit or a different government agency or consortium. And we've got a meeting on Friday to finally bring forward a workforce referral network, sort of a workforce resource inventory and referral network piece to help people access the jobs that are available. Rescue Mission's been involved, Workforce Center's been involved, and so that may be advancing while we are looking at these other things as well. So I just thought I would mention it. And we are at a point where pretty much anybody who's willing to work can get a job, but they can still be challenged with just connecting up to it. And so it's an interesting time for all those things. Thank you.
Mayor, if I could ask something.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mayor. When I read through this document, it says, and I'm on like page 3 here of it, says summary of public comments. Then it says comments received from citizens are attached to the con plan as an attachment in the citizen participation section of the con plan. Then you go to the next thing, it says summary of comments reviews not accepted and the reasons for not accepting them. And it says all comments were reviewed and accepted. Funding was changed to show the changes in funding for projects based on the comments received. Then when I go to that section, citizen participation, there are no comments. And I may just be looking at the wrong document or something, but
The comments are attached to the end of the consolidated action plan, and they're not in there yet because the comment period is right now. I attach them at the end, so I'm taking notes on what's being said, and then they get attached to the con plan, and that is updated.
okay.
Like Lazone gave me his comments maybe a couple weeks ago, so his whole package that he gave me will be attached to the con plan as an attachment.
And sent to HUD.
Yes.
But it
Yes.
seems like this is indicating that whatever comments you received were put into this, right?
And they will be.
And are we being asked to adopt this tonight?
Yes, it is set on for action.
I guess I don't understand how we adopt something and then we get comments for another month and those somehow get put in there. And sorry, I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot. I just,
No.
when Mr. Graves mentioned that, I said, well, I wanted to see his comments and I couldn't find them in this.
I have the comments actually with me tonight. Yeah, they'll be attached to the actual document once it is approved, and those comments are sent to HUD. The comments that we received prior to this coming onto Novus were considered and were acted on, and that's what I was speaking with Councilwoman Valdivia-Acla about.
So let me So is there a reason? Is there a reason they aren't provided, or is it just how we do it? I mean, is there a legal reason or a?
There's no legal reason. This is just, we've done it. This is the way we've done it for the past several years since I've been with the city.
Mayor, follow-up question.
Yes, Councilman Vogler.
So there was a comment period earlier, and those comments resulted in changes to the plan. I believe that's what Councilman Emerson read.
Yes.
Yes.
Right. Yes, that's correct.
But we're asked to approve this tonight, so comments made tonight or the last few weeks, do they not carry the same weight as comments that were made earlier in the process? Are there going to be changes made based on, well, it can't be changes made because we're going to approve it. So I guess I'm not following the flow.
The latest
process
comments that were received, I didn't deem that it was something that needed to change the con plan at this point, but they will be included.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
as if tonight's comments, for example, they'll all be included. It's just we have to have the public hearing to hear the final comments.
Okay, thanks, Corey.
So Mayor, if I could just ask a follow-up. So
Absolutely.
with the public hearing, I mean, sorry, I'm just trying to think through this process and understand it. Is there a reason we shouldn't wait to get the comments, that if there's still a period, you're saying, of comments coming in?
That period just ended. Just the 30-day comment period just ended. Now we're at public hearing, so you're all hearing the public comments tonight. So in the past, we have approved it after hearing the public comments.
Okay.
I think his point is that we're not getting the benefit, those comments obviously weren't considered and we're not getting advised.
And what we, in the last time that we considered this, we postponed and deferred action on it. If you would like, we can take a motion to defer. Any public comments that Corey has can be provided to you, and we can come back in 2 weeks and consider approval for this and give you the opportunity to review those comments if that's what you prefer.
I personally would like that, but.
Yeah, well, that's fine, I understand that.
Sure.
So are you going to make a motion? Sorry.
So is there a motion to defer?
Motion to defer for 1 week?
How much
No, we
time
don't.
do you need?
2 weeks?
They're together, so it will take, I can get them through Novus back by tomorrow.
1 week? 2 weeks?
We don't have a meeting in 2 weeks.
We have a meeting next week, but we don't have another one until the 7th of September.
3 weeks.
So we
That
can
would give
postpone
people
to the
time to read
7th
them.
and approve it at the budget, which
And
is
I
what.
asked for mine, so I asked to see them, so.
Yeah.
Motion to defer for 3 weeks
To September 7th.
to September 7th.
I'm sorry, that would pass the deadline that the consolidated action plan is due
Okay, well, then we got to go next week then.
next week.
So postpone 1 week to August 17th.
Motion to defer 1 week to August 17th meeting.
Do we have a
Motion.
second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilman Emerson. Any other questions or comments? Councilman Lesser.
I'm just going to make a comment. This is absolutely ridiculous. This is ridiculous. And that we're at this point and having this conversation and having to postpone it, that somebody can't have the forthright to understand what common sense, in my opinion, what Tony's talking about, it is absolutely ridiculous. That's all I got.
What's ridiculous?
If there's no additional comments or question,
What was that? I'm sorry, I didn't catch what was that?
We did not hear anything in here.
okay, if there's no additional comments or questions, we proceed by voting. The vote would be to defer this to next week.
Councilmembers Padilla,
Yes.
Nager,
Yes.
Dobler,
Yes.
Duncan,
Yes.
Lesser,
Yes.
Mayor De La Isla,
Yes.
Councilmembers Hiller,
Yes.
Valdivia Akla,
Yes.
Ortiz,
Yes.
and Emerson.
Yes.
We have 10 yes, motion carries.
We now move on to item F, if the clerk would read.
F is an ordinance introduced by City Manager Brent Trout establishing a probation fee, amending Topeka Municipal Code Section 240.010 and 246.10, and repealing original sections.
City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. We last week had this on as a discussion item, and Judge Karan Tadani is also online and available if there are questions.
Questions? Seeing no questions, what is the pleasure of the governing body?
I'll move approval.
We have a motion for approval by Councilman Dobler. Do we have a second?
I'll second, Deputy Mayor.
Deputy Mayor seconds. Thank you, Councilwoman Nager, for trying as well. We have no additional comments or questions. We proceed by voting.
Councilmembers Nager,
Yes.
Dobler,
Yes.
Duncan,
Yes.
Lesser,
Yes.
Hiller,
Yes.
Valdivia Akla,
Yes.
Ortiz,
Yes.
Emerson,
Yes.
and Padilla.
Yes.
We have 9 yes, motion carries.
We now move on to item G, if the clerk would read.
G is a resolution introduced by the members of the Public Infrastructure Committee comprised of council members Neil Dobler, Tony Emerson, and Mike Lesser, recommending approval of the certain facility projects for 2021.
City Manager.
Actually, I'll turn it over to Chair Dobler for comments related
Chair
to
Dobler.
approval.
Thank you. You have in front of you a recommendation from the committee to approve projects related to the firm. I would just point out that this is really a great group of projects, includes roof replacements on Station 4 and 7. I believe there's been a long history of problems with at least one of those stations. Also just a renovation, general renovation of fire stations, windows, generators. Nothing really new. It's you know, we're finally maintaining what we've got, and that makes a lot of sense. We've also got the a roof replacement for Station 11. So a lot of projects with our fire stations, projects here in the Holiday Building, and TPAC, HVAC replacements. I'm thinking somebody on the council might be happy about that, not sure who.
It's a good start.
As well as some roof and other replacements. We also have a little bit of work at the LEC. So I guess with that, if there's no questions, I would move approval.
Do we have a second before we proceed to discussion?
I'll second, Mayor.
Second by Deputy Mayor. Comments or questions for Councilman Chair Dobler, Councilwoman Nager?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to say I'm really, really happy to see that roof replacement on Station 7 is there. I have gotten a chance to look through it, and those city employees are very innovative, but some of their leak systems, it's just dripping from one cooler to another cooler. And in the hottest days of the year and in the coldest days of the year, those people are suffering. So I really, really, really appreciate that being something that we are looking forward to replacing. So thank you, guys. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Councilwoman Ortiz.
Thank you. I just want to thank the committee for a great job. I just have a question at Second and Golden lighting replacement. Is that the building there at Second and Golden, or is that street lighting? What exactly is that?
I believe that's a building. I can't remember what the service is out of that building.
Right, it's a building that we use with some of our property maintenance folks.
Property maintenance, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, seeing no additional comments or questions?
Mayor, if I may.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I just want to thank the committee again.
Of course.
Again, the decision to keep this as a standing committee has proven to be of value to this council. And I think it helps keep an eye on the things that need to be done and gets these projects moved forward. So I just want to thank the chair and Councilmember Emerson and Lesser for their work on this. I think it's an extremely important committee that I'm really glad it's in place and should stay in place. Thank you for their work.
I echo the sentiments. All right. If there's no other comments, we proceed by voting.
Councilmembers Dobler,
Yes.
Duncan,
Yes.
Lesser,
Councilman Lesser.
Sorry, yes.
Mayor De La Isla,
Yes.
Council Members Hiller,
Yes.
Valdivia Aquila,
Yes.
Ortiz,
Yes.
Emerson,
Yes.
Padilla,
Yes.
and Nager.
Yes.
We have 10 yes, motion carries.
Motion carries. That concludes the action items. We now move on to the non-action items. Non-action item A, going back to the budget, City Clerk, could you please read?
A is discussion regarding the 2022 City of Topeka operating budget.
City Manager and Steve Wade show.
I think tonight, we don't have any prepared presentations. We will, as I mentioned, have a presentation as it relates to the inmate program and what it covers and how and the funding that goes with that program. There was a meeting that was held with staff, the Chief of Staff chaired, and they will be working on doing a formal presentation to address that. So at this point, we're looking for any input related to other items that we need to provide additional information to you when we get to the next meeting. Remember, the hearing itself is scheduled for the 7th, and so next week will be the last chance for any presentations you'd like to see. As you continue to work through the budget and look at it, if there's other items that you think of during the week that you'd like to hear about next Tuesday, please let us know if you don't have anything that comes to mind at the moment.
Mayor.
Before we have additional discussion from the council, we do have somebody signed up for public comment on this item, and it's Mr. Ledbetter. I would like to provide him the space to start the discussion.
Space. Thank you, governing body. Part of this is a repeat and some of it's new. As I've said several times, so you've already heard it, we absolutely must fund our police. We know that nationwide there's cities that decided to do a defunding of the police last year, and those large cities are now suffering surges in crime. And I'm glad we're not seeing that here, and I'm glad that we've always had the wisdom to fund our police. And they have great support among the community. One of the areas that continues to need to be addressed, and it's probably going to need yet another reorganization and probably some changes in some leadership, but and I'm not faulting current leaders over codes, but I just never see the real progress that I'm looking for in that that unit or that division. It touches a lot of areas. It's got it, you know, the person that's going to run that, whoever that is, has got to be familiar with the court system and the lawyers, and you're going to have some understanding of legal to know that you do not have to bow to slumlords in this town. And I think that they've been a huge problem in this city for a number of years. And, you know, especially the last 3.5 to 4 years, I've seen, you know, what should have been already solved, not solved. Whether it's White Lakes or whether it's other problems, it just continues on. And it's got to finally be solved. One of the things that we've got is some COVID money coming in. We've got large reserves in a number of entities now, including some of the utilities. I will go out on a limb here, but I'm going to say I think it's time we put a large amount of that resource into replacing the distribution lines in this community that continue to break in these neighborhoods, like we're breaking on Oakley at one time, and now those are fixed. But even the neighborhood I live in, I did some research, and those pipes are about 25 years old because they redid the lines in there from the Rusty Water program, which was accomplishing 10 miles of replacement a year for probably 8 or 9 years. So it can be done, but it's not being done. And those lines don't break, they're PVC. And so that's, you know, we've got about 200 miles of bad pipe. If we've got some lead problems, I want to be the first to know about it because those should be addressed. I've just never heard of lead problems in this community. Not saying they don't exist, I've just not heard of it. But I do know about the iron pipe continuing to break, and I know that it has not been solved. I personally think that utilities should be under Public Works. I think there's enough construction projects related to utilities that it probably never should have been taken out of Public Works. I guess the date was December of 17. That was after Colson. I don't remember, I couldn't remember the exact date they did it, but I researched it. Maybe we'd get more productivity on that construction that needs to be done under that mix. I have said, I sent you emails, I still think that there's at least some opening for privatization of some of the street repairs in this community. And yes, I'm willing to give the new guy a chance, but he's got a lot to catch up on. And I think that as people quit or there's attrition, I don't know why we couldn't privatize more of that instead of having public employees for that. And that's enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ledbetter. Additional comments or questions for our staff?
Comment, question?
Yes.
Councilman Duncan.
I would like to have a discussion, not necessarily tonight, but before we pass this budget once more. We touched on it last year and for a variety of reasons didn't do it, and both with the council and staff. I think sometimes we have a good idea and then our execution is poor, so then we just throw the entire idea out. And I still believe that this city needs to invest some dollars in hiring, whether it's part-time or full-time, someone to assist us with our grant writing process. And I think as we talk tonight too about whether those infrastructure dollars go through the state or the feds and we have to bid for them through grant processes. And I think we've seen some other things come up, particularly with COVID. And I know we have departments where we have very good people working on that, but it's also not their primary jobs. And I think they could use some assistance from a more centralized person to not just take it off their plate at times, but give them some aid. And so in looking at the budget the last few years, I think we can make it happen. Again, I think there's various models we can look at, whether it's full-time or part-time or on contract. And so I would like to reignite that conversation from a year ago and have it before we pass the budget to see if we can make that work and get something done there. So.
Yeah, and that has been a discussion that Steve Wade and I have had internally over the last few weeks as a possibility, and talking to Bill. It is something that we're looking at as a possibility, even if we look at it as a grant administrator slash grant writer, because we'll have a lot of grants that we're doing.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Other comments?
Mayor, if I could ask a question.
Absolutely. Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Mayor. To follow up on, I guess, what Councilman Duncan, didn't we, a few years ago, we went through that process and we hired a grant writer?
Yes.
And she was phenomenal. And we lost her to the state.
Yes, we lost her. And so she moved to another position. When we were going through the budget and preparing for 2021, and we had to make cuts with regards to positions, the position was vacant, so the decision was made to use that as a savings and try and see what would happen. Not unlike we talked about the web developer, web person. We decided that was one, since it was vacant, we would attempt to try and run without that person. And so, as you stated, it is something that is preferred to have on staff, because not only did she write grants, but she also made sure that all report filings were done and so forth for all the grants that we did receive.
And I guess just as a follow-up, I agree that that's a valuable thing. The one thing that I would have, through the years when we've worked on a lot of projects with smaller cities, and they usually have like a contracted grant writer that works for them. And what's nice about that is they only, they only earn what they get.
Right, and that's
So
been
it
the
gives them
discussion.
some real incentive.
That's been the discussion that we've been having is it more appropriate for us to hire when we need individuals? And there are individuals that are out there. We've had recently, even I think within the last month, we had an unsolicited email from an individual that says, I write grants and I live in the Topeka area and I would be interested in contracting service with you. So we're analyzing both those possibilities and determining if a part-time position, a full-time position, or contract is the best way to go when it comes to grants.
Thank you.
We identify the need. I recognize the need that you bring forward.
Thank you.
And just Tony and Brent, I know that you guys know this, but Sheena Schmidt brought into this organization millions of dollars. millions of dollars. So whether we hire a person, I mean, we have to vet them for the caliber, but it's a position that brought a lot of money into this community.
Yeah, had to send the state a bill for training.
Other comments or questions?
Question, Mayor.
Councilwoman Hiller.
Thank you. I was trying to go through my notes over the weekend to kind of look at whether there were questions outstanding. A couple of the things that I saw, one was that wasn't there supposed to be an internal audit going on in the IT department or fund, and are we going to get that report next week? Or?
I just received the draft about 4 days ago, and myself and Steve Wade are working through it. It's a draft right now. So when we get in that position to share it with other staff and get a final, we will get that distributed.
Might not be quite ready by next week, but then
It will
maybe
definitely
before
not be ready
September.
for next week. I would
Right.
not, I'm not going to make you a promise. It'll be ready maybe September 7th, but we probably won't have the final draft until the end of September.
Okay, well, I think it got discussed along the way in the budget cycle, so. And then it seemed like someone had been asking for a list of consulting contracts over X amount of dollars. Did we get that? Did I miss it? It wasn't my question, but there'd been discussion of finding,
I'm not
council being aware of the
I'm not aware
consulting
of that as-
contracts.
I'm not aware of that as a request, Councilwoman.
Pardon?
There's a thing on next week's agenda.
Yeah, there's an item on next week's agenda that relates to consulting contracts that's being brought forward by the Policy and Finance Committee, but not as it relates to the budget. I don't recall a request.
Okay, I guess I always assumed that had to do with the budget, budget/management.
It's a separate item.
Okay. Thank you. Those were my two questions.
Okay. Additional comments, questions from the team? Seeing none, just remember that next week will be our final discussion for the budget. And please, if you have anything that you want to bring forth to this team, please email city manager so that he could get that to Steve as soon as possible and get us the answers that we need. At this point in time, we move on to the public comment. And I'm looking through my email to get the whole list. First person signed up for public comment is Ms. Janice Crawley.
Yes, thank you for letting me speak, Mayor and council members, and thank you for your hard work that you do year-round. My question, which was posed in the very beginning by Councilwoman Christina Alcala, was about unemployment and how that's being budgeted. I'm not quite sure if that goes through you as far as on a local level in the hiring process, and how could those things be made improvements to as far as how they're open access to those who are trying to call and get contact. And the city manager had mentioned how he would like to speak out and hear more from his constituents and those in the community about what their needs are on a daily basis. And I wanted to ask him personally, have you checked out the KDOL website, Kansas Department of Labor Facebook page? Sorry, excuse me. Because there's people from each district here locally, along with from each different background. And if there's ever been a consideration of changing the way the system is as far as separating regular unemployment from union unemployment, because that's something that I've heard out in the community before, to see if there was anything that could change, that could make these things better. I know that it's a evolving network that has to be considered, but didn't know if that had anything to do with budgeting as far as council.
Just a reminder that the public comment section is a time for our constituents to be able to express their concerns about the community. Those comments are not to be directed. This one was a question. I'm certain the city manager may take notes and follow up later on as we have the information.
Yes.
The next person signed up for public comment is Mr. Joseph Ledbetter.
Thank you for hearing me out so many times. I haven't talked this many times in a while, a long time. What I'd like to talk about is next week's agenda, just real briefly. The contract item, I think, is important. I think it's a first step towards providing a little more checks and balance to the executive side of this administration or this government. It's not everything I'd like. I'd like to see it on all contracts over $50,000, but I certainly support this as a first good step on the consulting contracts. I'm not going to go into tonight what I've discovered when I filed cores, but I was extremely disappointed in where money was being spent over the last year and a half on some of these contracts. On a little more positive note, what I would like to see this community start to look at, and we've talked about it on the fringe, but we never seem to really talk about it, how to do it. I would like to see some housing incentives for people to actually build in this community. And I'm not trying to make this a east-west type thing, because there's lots of lots available around the lake still, and in other parts of East Topeka, Southern Hills. There's a lot of lots that are available out southwest, but it seems like we just don't have a good absorption rate on these lots, and how to, not just market them as a community, but we seem to, I'm not trying to pick on anybody again, but I never hear new ideas about how to grow this city from planning and development. And I've asked. And there's got to be more than just the NRP. I mean, that's a nice program, but it's not obviously filling up a lot of vacant lots. It's important to grow your community. It's important to have a growing population. I know I've done my share, and so I just think that it's something that's important. And I mean, seriously, it really is. You don't want a shrinking community. You want it to be growing, dynamic. You want it to be welcoming, but one of the ways to welcome people is say, hey, here's an incentive to build a house. Maybe it'll be a free lot, maybe it won't be, but maybe it'll be a free water meter. Those are $2,000 minimum. Maybe it'll be an additional incentive. We're going to give you an extra $1,000 as long as you build this house. Now, they have to build it. They don't get anything until it's built and occupied. There's an occupation certificate. But at the minimum, with inflation, you're going to have a $150,000 house, and that's a very modest house. And just think of the tax base. And it's going to be good tax base for the next 80, 90 years, I'm sure, because we have qualified builders in Topeka. So I don't know. I just wish we would actually talk about this and actually come up with some ideas and invite people to the table and say, hey, builders, what would it take? Hey, maybe some of the realtor people could be involved. But I mean, people want to build inside the city limits. There's a lot of building going on outside, but you just don't see that excitement and that I'd like to see. I'd like to see a couple hundred houses a year built. And they could be duplexes. Those could count too. I mean, something that people can buy and actually live in, and it's not just for rental property. Anyway, those are just some thoughts, things I'd like to see. I wish we'd actually do it. Maybe planning could come up with some ideas. We could ask them to do something and maybe invite the rest of us to the table. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. The next person signed up to speak is Mr. Lazone Grace.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Welcome. Hello again, City Council members, administrators. I'm just going to sort of highlight from what Mr. Trout had mentioned during his presentation on the ARPA funds, on those negative economic impacts that he had mentioned. And that had sort of mentioned what funds could be used for. And on his handout, it had stated to assist small business assistance program. And I just sort of wanted to expand that because that also included nonprofit organizations. And there was another below that, that's on the negative economic impacts, the community violence intervention. He had mentioned the SAVE program. Now there was, the Treasury has a frequently asked question section, and I think that although this is very good, it doesn't mention everything that people could possibly think about doing. You know, job training to address negative economic or public health impacts. And I think at a meeting before, Mr. Trout had said job training. What does that mean? What really does community violence intervention mean? There are, and they had mentioned some organizations or programs, and I wish other organizations or programs could be mentioned just as well. If there's more information, organizations and businesses, if they know that there's potential, there's going to be some loans or grants, they can start preparing now. If they know that nonprofits will be able to receive some monies and they think that they have a community violence intervention program, they should be starting to put their paperwork and their proposals together now. And any other for nonprofits, maybe no monies will be allocated for for-profit businesses or nonprofits, but I think that the quicker that the community knows what is potential, that they can start getting prepared to take advantage of it. A lot of local organizations, when the monies were available from the first state and county funds, they really missed out on the opportunity because it was just too late for them to know what was coming down the pike. And so anything that I believe that could share information on there, that would be, very helpful. One of the comments that I had added on the consolidated action plan, there's a list of different organizations that they seek input from, and I guess that they work with. I know that whether directly or indirectly, our organization, IBSA, works with the city, and I had asked for our organization to be added, there. We provided the Employment 101 workshop for the Impact Avenues program for the whole year. It's nothing big, but we are trying to do our part in doing something direct. I think that sometimes if you just look at the organizations on that list, you think that these are the organizations that you're only working with. And so I know that there are the WILS program that he had mentioned. I hope that there will be open, fair consideration and competition for whatever funds that's made available. There are some organizations in the communities. I think that they should have a shot on getting their proposals together. And if this funding is available through the new funds, CARES Act funds that may not already been spent, there are new commitments for digital equity. If this infrastructure bill is passed, that could do a lot of things. So I'm consulting other nonprofits to try to help them understand where this money is at and to get their proposals together so that they can come here and actually get paid to do the work that is needed in the neighborhoods. They're fourth and fifth generation Topekans. They have organizations. They should finally start getting paid to do some of the work that they're giving away their time. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. The last person signed up to speak this evening is Ms. Susan McClatchy.
I already spoke. Thank you.
All right. With that, we move on to the announcements. City Clerk.
For the August 17th agenda, we have, for consent, we have one weekly expenditure. Action items include the resolution for temporary notes for Series 2021A. We have the ordinance and resolution for Series 2021C for general obligation bonds. We have a notice of public hearing date for the budget, setting it at September 7th. We have an ordinance for professional contracts over $50,000 regarding governing body approval. We have governing body rules and procedures amendments. And then we also have deferral from this week for the con-action plan. And then the non-action items include the 2022 Special Alcohol Grant Fund, the operating budget, and then we have 2 updates from the Public Health and Safety Committee, including one on property and premises report, and the other one is on broadband initiatives.
City Manager.
I have nothing additional tonight, Mayor.
All right. Well, a few announcements. First of all, to all of the team, Chad Logan that put together the 2030 Gala, great job. The Expo Center, the Stormont Vale Center, was absolutely transformed. It was like we were somewhere else. We also had recently the visit of Secretary of Education Cardona, as well as having Second Gentleman Emhoff here in our community. And they were here to listen to our students. It was pretty cool to just watch them interact with our kids at Hoy Hoy Mighty Troy, Topeka High. And it was wonderful just to hear them just talk to the kids about, what their dreams, what their desires and their thoughts were, their concerns about the Delta variant, and hearing their hearts, not really what we had to say. They really did not speak to any professional. The governor was there, Superintendent Dr. Anderson was there. She is a shining star, and I tell you what, if you did not get a chance, I think it was televised on KSNT, DeAndre Hicks, Kelm Lear, and 2 other young ladies that I met that day just did a phenomenal job just asking some pretty serious questions of these gentlemen. So I hope that they both felt welcome to our community, and that the experiences that they had here in Topeka are able to help across the country. Another fun thing is that we're having yet another celebrity coming into our community. Just found out that on August 23rd, the Jayhawk has landed Billy Bob Thornton. He's got, I know, I'm seeing some faces going, what? So the Jayhawk is going to have Billy Bob Thornton on August 23rd, if you want to get tickets to that event. And then finally, on a little bit serious note, I've been always very transparent with the community, and I know that people have been wondering why I'm in and out of the council meetings. I am a huge advocate for those who choose to get the vaccine. I'm sure that all of us have been receiving the emails asking us not to force vaccines on anybody. But COVID is no joke. On Monday, I'm going to have a pretty big procedure. This post-COVID has been extremely difficult, and it's impacted my heart. So I am going to have a bionic heart starting on Monday with a new pacemaker. So appreciate everybody's prayers and positive thoughts with that. Obviously, on Tuesday, Deputy Mayor Padilla is going to be running the meeting. But I wanted to make sure that everybody in the community was aware that I wasn't hiding it and that I was being transparent. So thank you, everybody, for being there for me through this up and down with my heart. On Monday, this is all going to get fixed, and then you're going to have to put up with me. So with that, Councilwoman Ortiz.
Thank you, Mayor. Good luck to you, and our prayers and thoughts will be with you. I wanted to send condolences to Ellen Ross's family, Jessica and Johanna. Ellen Ross was a neighborhood president for years. And she also worked with animal control. She loved dogs. And so she passed away, and it was really neat. Their NIA, they rallied around her daughters, and they bought potluck, and they had one last meeting with her, and it was really, really neat. So I just wanted to mention that for those of you who have been around as long as I have, you might know her. Also, tomorrow school starts for 501, so we need to slow down. I'm glad to say that there's a little 14-year-old boy that's going to be going to Topeka High. I would like to ask Mr. Emerson if he would get on board and come by my house and take him to school in the morning. That'd be really good, a cool process for him, and he might understand some of this Trojan spirit. 7:30 we'll be ready, Mr. Emerson, and I'm sure Hannah will agree with me. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Councilman Emerson, respond to that one.
Thank you, Mayor. You know what? I can see bright things in that kid's future because he's going to learn the phrase, "It's great to be a Scot." So I will be there tomorrow morning to pick him up, to take him to Highland Park. No, on a serious note, well, first of all, Mayor, I certainly hope you do well next week, and it'll be great to see you back here, full of energy here in a couple weeks. But there's two things that happened this week, I guess this week and the week before, that really gave me pause, thinking about the budget. The first was, some of you may know, I'm developing a residential subdivision in another state. And this state has very low property taxes. And in this particular state, you have instead of special benefit districts, you set up what's called a metro district, where you're kind of the government and you get to impose a mill levy on your houses you build to recover. And in this case, we were trying to get 60 mills. And the city manager there is like, my gosh, 60 mills, there's no way. Right now, people in that city pay like 2.5 or 3 mills is their total property tax they pay. And I'm looking here at our total mill levy, and by the way, the city is not the largest by any means, as I think Councilman Lesser pointed out a few weeks ago, but it's 160 mills last year. The second thing was, so that was the first thing, when the staff in that city pushed back and said, man, 60 mills, you can do 50, but you can't do 60. But then yesterday I was talking to a good friend who lives in the city, and out very closely, actually Mr. Dobler's district. And we were talking about property tax, and he said, you know what, I made a mistake. And I said, what's that? And he said, if I'd have moved and if I'd have built my house 2 blocks away, I'd have been paying, half the tax that I'm paying right now. And I'm not saying this to beat up on staff or any of us, but I guess earlier tonight we heard about we're going to get all this money. We're getting millions and millions of dollars thrown at us. And to me, it might be like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for us to not do new stuff, not start new things, but fix some fundamental problems our city has. Mr. Ledbetter talked about all the main breaks and distribution lines, and I know Mr. Copley is working on a plan to address a lot of those. But it would be great to use this once-in-a-generation money we have to fundamentally fix some of the things and bend the cost curve down. I would love it if in 5 or 10 years, the mill levy is 10 mills less than it is today, even if values don't go up. Thinking long term, I'm just like, I don't know if my wife and I can stay here after we retire because, a lot of people are paying $500 to $1,000 forever, in taxes, a month. So anyway, that's my thoughts. We got to do something. People and companies can't afford to be here. And if you think it's bad in residential, I would hate to see Mr. Dover and his company have invested millions and millions and millions in their office here, which, thank you, by the way. But commercial property is worse. It's 2 or 3 times the rate of residential. So you see somebody building something and their tax is $100,000 a year on a building. And I know there's a lot of issues. We live in a capital city where, like all capital cities, there is a ton of tax-exempt property. We have $1 billion capital. Maybe it's a $2 or $3 billion capital. If the state just paid 0.1% of what they should pay, we'd probably drop 30 or 40 mills. So anyway, if the governor is watching and would like to take me up on that, I'd bring the papers by tomorrow. But anyway, that's all for tonight. Thank you. Thank you for listening to that diatribe.
Thank you, sir. Deputy Mayor.
I'd like to comment on Lazone's idea about incentives for local residents with regards to building. I'd like to talk with him about that idea at some length, because that's something that I have given some thought to, because I think that there's an opportunity, much like Council Member Emerson says, is this once in a lifetime opportunity to make a shift in the economy of Topeka and what it brings forth for its residents. We work pretty hard at trying to get new business here, new residents here. We have to work twice as hard to take care of the people we have here already. And so, Lazone, I invite you sometime to give me a call, and I'd like to bounce around that idea, because I think that has some merit. I know that there's always going to be but we can't because of, but I've always tried to approach staff at the city since I've come on the council with, I'd rather hear, not hear we can't do that than we can't do it this way, but there is another way that we might be able to look at it. And I think if we continue to do that kind of problem solving at everything that we approach as a council, I think we'll better serve our citizens. So, Mayor, I also wish you well with the procedure. You're tough. You've come through a lot already, and I know you will do well. We'll be thinking of you. And take care. Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks. It serves you best than anybody else, right? Councilwoman Nager.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, I'll be thinking of you this next week, and we know that the beat will go on because you will be bionic. So I'm very excited to see you as you're healing, and excited to work with the council next week and have your presence in that way. August is National Dog Month. Not as a pet owner myself, but as somebody who is always seeing dogs walked around the neighborhood, I just want to remind everybody to be very careful with your precious pets. Make sure that they are coming inside during these hellaciously hot days and that they are being well watered. I also wanted to make sure that I was highlighting, and the deputy mayor has been teasing me that I haven't been doing enough show and tell. So I wanted to highlight the Helping Hands Humane Society. I got to go on a tour about 2 weeks ago because my other work is involved in supporting them. And we did a tour of the facilities, and it's a wonderful, wonderful place with a great staff and many, many animals that need love and need good homes. And I learned that this is kitten season. So there are many, many small cats that need to be adopted because there are a lot of cats who are giving birth at this time. Again, Helping Hands Humane Society. Oh, there we go. You can find them online. You can call them. They are open 7 days a week. Please drop by. They are doing a great job. They make sure that your pets are vaccinated, which leads me into my second point. In Shawnee County, the health department let us know that this past week that of the eligible people in Shawnee County, 53% of people are fully vaccinated, which is great. We are also finding that in Shawnee County, the rate of breakthrough vaccinations, so breakthrough vaccinations are whenever somebody is fully vaccinated and they end up getting infected with COVID, whether they are symptomatic or asymptomatic, is 2 out of 100,000 patients. And that is, I want to make sure I was reading this correctly, 0.002%. Those people are experiencing less symptoms and they are getting less serious side effects. And you can see the terrible side effects that people are having if they have survived, and there have been too many deaths already. If you are interested in getting vaccinated, are not currently vaccinated, there are many different ways you can get vaccinated. You can go to the health department's website, which is right here. And you can go to any of these places, call them, get an appointment, get vaccinated, because this is more than just your health. This is the health of our community. It is the economic health of our community. And for those who know people who have been working for the past year and a half at Stormont Vale and the University of Kansas, St. Francis campus, our healthcare staff has been through enough. They need your help. Get vaccinated. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. The other thing that I was going to add to your announcement is that what they're learning with the Delta variant is that 25% of those individuals that are going to get the Delta variant without a vaccine are going to end up in the hospital, which is much higher than with Alpha. Councilman Dobler.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple quick things. First of all, I can relate to heart operations. Science does amazing things now, so I know you'll be back soon, but we'll all be thinking of you. Just a quick follow-up. You know, there is a bit of education. Your friend that you were talking to, had he built his house in the county, he would have saved about 20 mills out of 160, not half. Right. Because you do pick up Mission Township mill levy. The city of Topeka, I agree 100%. We need to find a way to cut property tax. City's mill levy is the lowest of the major entities that tax, that being school boards and the county. There is a great way to lower the mill levy, and that's city-county consolidation. We in the city pay for 2 law enforcement agencies. We pay for 2 public works departments. It would make a lot of sense to see how we can consolidate. We tried it 20 years ago and it failed miserably. But there's always another time. The only other thing I would like to do is a point of personal privilege. Today is my mother's 93rd birthday. She lives in Osage City. She's a native Kansan. My father also lived to 93, so I guess that's what that tells me is I've got another 30 plus years of causing trouble. Thank you, Mayor.
Happy birthday, Mama Dobler. Councilman Duncan.
Well, there wasn't a natural opening until Councilmember Emerson spoke this evening, so I will politely remind those who live in the city limits that for the 9th consecutive year, your city government is not going to raise your mill levy, while the county is considering a mill levy increase. Not shade, just fact. So we'll see how that goes, but there's your reminder for that. I just have 3 quick things this evening, Mayor. First is Urish Road, just the mill and overlay is going smoothly. It was actually ahead of schedule. I think the weather may put it back, but I just wanted to thank staff and the council and Councilmember Dobler for helping to move that along. Those people out there are very happy. A few complaints about traffic, but they'll get over it. They're very happy it's being done, so we're glad to see that. Going to be a much safer road here in a few weeks. Second thing is, the VA system announced that they are not going to alter their services. And I want to thank the veterans and their families and their supporters who stood outside of that building and asked for at least to have some answers, and who wrote letters to the VA administration and emails, and who contacted our congressional representatives, and who took the time to reach out to us. I know for a fact that having Mr. Kopfer come before us and answer questions from us that he did not afford to be answered directly to the veterans made a difference in that decision. And what I remind everybody, including him, and message I've tried to get across is they have every right to make changes. And at some point, some of those changes may be for the better. I think the frustrating part of that process was they just didn't communicate with the community very much about what was going to happen. And so in the future, we'll just keep asking, talk with us so that whatever those changes are, we as a community are ready to handle them and be ready to continue to help our veterans. But I'm glad at least that decision was made. In fact, I didn't get invited to their ribbon cutting for some reason, but they did a beautiful ribbon cutting that showed millions of dollars of upgrades. So I'm sorry I wasn't allowed to be there, but I'm glad at least that there's some new equipment there. The last thing is I want to address some breaking news that came out today regarding the Evel Knievel Museum. WIBW had a story that came out of Las Vegas that said that there's some consideration of that museum being moved to Las Vegas. And I just want to address a couple things. The first is nothing is final. Had some conversations with some folks today. Nothing is final, and there will be some efforts from individuals in this community, including with the partnership and others, to reach out to the Knievel family and see if that's going to happen for sure, if there's anything we can do to keep that facility here. So those wheels are in motion. The second thing is, as the chair of the Transient Guest Tax Committee, what I've talked to staff about and some others is, we will take a look at if that is something that happens. Looking at future dollars, we want to make sure the money goes to things that are committed to Topeka, and so we will promise to watch your tax dollars and make sure that we will not continue to fund that project if in fact it does end up leaving Topeka. And I've actually had some conversations with the owners of that, and they're not opposed to that. They understand. And that's the last point I want to make. Just so everyone knows, it's an interesting setup over at that museum, in that while the individual, the family, and the Pattersons who own that museum, they still have to have the licensing rights from the Knievel family. And at the end of the day, if the Knievel family wants to remove those licensing rights or change that contract, they have the authority to do that. And that's part of what has happened here. A developer has approached that family about doing something somewhere else. And so I just want to say to the folks, the Pattersons have been here for 70 plus years. They've been great members of this community. I don't know them that well personally. I've just had a few conversations, but they're committed to Topeka. So your frustration should not be directed at them, I guess is my point, because they're going to try to do the best they can to work through this situation. And they may have an opportunity, if the inevitable happens that it moves, to still participate and be a part of that. And if we can keep a Topeka connection to helping with that facility, that would be great also. So just wanted folks to give a little update we have at this point, because I know there's a lot of questions. Got emails full of them, and I'm watching social media and I see what those are. So I wanted to give what we knew to this point and let everyone know we'll keep you updated. And that is all I have. Thank you.
Councilman Lesser.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Little update, Spencer and I have texted a little bit about this today, as well as I've been on the phone. A little bit of an update that came while we were in council is a press release from the museum saying that the deal is not done, but it is imminent. I'm a businessman. I can read between the lines, and they do state they're not selling out anyone to Las Vegas. Their Topeka team will be installing and operating the museum in Las Vegas. So that sounds a little bit more than imminent. Sounds like you guys are getting the job. What I can say is I know Spencer and his committee and several others. I will take a hard look at this and the investment that in transit guest tax dollars that we made, and I think we expected a little bit more transparency than this if the licensing agreement did not have a little more teeth than the 12-year agreement that we agreed in incentives. So right's right, wrong's wrong. But that's all I have tonight. It's been an interesting evening.
Councilwoman Hiller.
Had just a couple of things. First, a fair warning to my colleague, Councilwoman Nager. The last time I went to as a volunteer for an event at Helping Hands, I did end up with a cat. So, just fair warning. It's a really nice cat, and it's a good home. Wanted to give a shout out to Safe Streets and all the neighborhoods. It was nice to get out for the rebirth of National Night Out this weekend. I only had 3, whereas 2 years ago I had 9. But I actually had time to watch kids play basketball enough to run off. And it's just wonderful to see the community come together. Each one in my district was very different, and I think that happens citywide as well. But people do come together. It's nice to see the police officers and the firefighters are generally at most of them, and other people pitch in. I had one new neighborhood host this time, even straight out of COVID, and that's really nice. Also, I'm a sucker for trains. So I did run up in all the heat yesterday to catch the big boy coming in from Wyoming on its way, on its big trip. If anybody wants to see that steam engine on its way back, it's coming through midday on September the 2nd at 11:45. There were at least 1,000 people up there, all kinds of folks, both sides of the tracks, all over. So there's plenty of room to go up and bring somebody along. There were people with 3-year-olds and 93-year-olds coming with their eyes and ears open to watch that train come through. So it was a lot of fun. Just for the record, I think I've said something already, but I certainly appreciate Tony's statements about taking advantage of this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to put together the different sources of money and make a difference long-term for the city. I've consulted with Steve and his staff, and in simple terms, they affirm from their math that every time we borrow $1 million, it's costing us $400,000 on the 30-year notes. And every time we borrow $1 million, it's costing us $220,000 or 22%, even on a 10-year note. So when we can convert those and migrate the annual expenses and the maintenance expenses that somehow migrated in there over the years, we can take advantage of this opportunity to get them out so that we've got that money for operations or for capital. And there's also room in our borrowing cap as it is today to do some of those big projects that people have had in mind over the years. A new LEC, fix City Hall, a new fire station, Elevation Parkway, which has been pushed so far back because other things have been in its way. We would have room to do those things within the cap if we get the things that don't belong there out. So I'm in, and thanks for all the efforts, especially Steve and his staff there, and the different departments that have migrated cash into things that would have been borrowed before to keep us moving along as we move down this process. And last but not least, Mayor, thoughts and prayers with you. Take it easy. That's it.
Impossible, but thank you. Councilwoman Valdivia Alcara.
Thank you, Mayor. Blessings to you on this next part of your journey. I'll text you and keep an eye on you. And also wanted to say a big shout out to all the National Night Outs against crime that happened Saturday. I only had 2, where I usually have 5. And they were pretty well attended, but thanks to all the hardworking volunteers and all the folks that showed up, and it was good to have a lot of good conversation with constituents. Also, I do want to say thank you to Barry Feeker and Bill Persinger. They have agreed in September to come into Oakland, and I hopefully Commissioner Cook will be there and city representation on talking about the handful of homeless individuals that, again, we've been talking about for a number of weeks. But Oakland folks, that information will be out to you here shortly. Also, I wanted to just say I know that people are probably going to go, why is she even talking about this? But whatever. The IPCC report came out yesterday. And the IPCC report is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And this is across the board of volunteer scientists that come together. They're not paid to swing it any one way or another, but basically they are reiterating what we already know. And that is that the earth and all the inhabitants, meaning us and all the animals and every trees and plants, are in trouble. And I speak of this more and more, actually, honestly, not for any of us here, but for our children and our grandchildren, our nieces and our nephews, our great nieces, our great nephews, the future generations that maybe haven't even been born yet, or the ones that are already here. And as well for Mother Earth, because we know that we are in trouble. When you look at the IPCC regional fact sheet for North and Central America, it states that temperature change, mean and extremes in observations in most regions is larger in North and Central America than the global mean and is attributed to human influence. Also, it says relative sea level rise is projected to increase along most coasts. This is a high confidence scenario. This is a high confidence projection, and are associated with increased coastal flooding and erosion. Exceptions include regions with strong coastal land uplift along the south coast of Alaska and Hudson Bay. Ocean acidification along coasts and marine heat waves, intensity and duration are projected to increase. Strong declines in glaciers, permafrost, snow cover are observed and will continue in a warming world, and there is high confidence of this projection. Tropical cyclones with higher precipitation, severe storms, and dust storms are expected to become more extreme in the Caribbean, U.S. Gulf Coast, East Coast, Northern and Southern Central America, and there is a medium confidence here. Heavier rains are predicted and more flooding is predicted in our region, which comes under CNA, that's Central and North America. I'm not even sure why I'm bringing this up, because usually when you talk about climate change in this landlocked state, there doesn't seem to be a lot of interest that you get, but I think we also have to consider that there's going to be a huge amount of migration that is going to occur because of this. And if we don't start getting a handle on this, we're going to be caught in a reactive mode. And I recall a meeting that Hannah and I had with city manager and some others about believing that we needed a full-time sustainability position here in the city. And while city manager said, there wasn't enough money for a full-time position, he did have ideas about another place where you worked, where folks went into the community and looked to different businesses, corporations, along with a small amount of city dollars to create that full-time position. And I recall Miss Hannah said that she would work with me to go to those corporations with whoever else is interested and beg for money to get a full-time sustainability position here with the city. And when I say that, I don't say that for the sake of just saying it and trying to posture. What I say it for is that we need to do something. And we need to get moving. So I would just leave that, for thought for everyone. And if you want any information on it, please feel free to email me and I can send it out to you. Thank you, Mayor.
All right, at this point in time, we are in need of executive session. And I would like for the city attorney to read the parameters.
Yes, the motion would be to recess into executive session for a period of 15 minutes to discuss the acquisition of real property as justified by KSA 75-4319B6. The motion would include requesting the following staff to assist the governing body in its discussion: City Manager Trout, Chief of Staff Cochran, Deputy City Attorney Feeney, and Utilities Director Copley. No action will be taken when the meeting resumes.
We have heard the parameters of the executive session. Councilwoman Ortiz makes a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Councilwoman Hager seconds the motion. We will proceed with the vote.
Council members Duncan,
Yes.
Lesser,
Yes.
Mayor De La Isla,
Yes.
Council members Hiller,
Yes.
Valdivia Acala,
Yes.
Ortiz,
Yes.
Emerson,
Yes.
Padilla,
Yes.
Nager,
Yes.
and Dobler.
Yes.
We have 10 yes, motion carries.
All right, motion carries. It is 8:59. I'm going to give 5 minutes to the body. I'm certain that everybody will appreciate a 5-minute break. Let's say around 9:05, we will convene. And again, the parameters indicate that we will not exceed 15 minutes for this executive session. See you back in 5 minutes.
Yeah, no.